Okay, there we go. That took a minute. I think we're good to go. Welcome to OnCon 03. Glad to have you here. This is planning to be, and let me know if everything's working out, all of you there out in chat land. This is hopefully going to be an online anime convention running tonight through tomorrow, where we'll be looking at anime from all eras, but particularly focusing on the late 1990s. That's right, a pivotal point in anime history. Got some fun guests lined up that hopefully will be showing up a little later on tonight. And yeah, this is going to be hopefully just a fun time to go and talk about anime in general. And like I said, kind of what the whole thing is. Now, the cool thing is we have a bunch of panels for tomorrow. So tomorrow's really where we're going to have a lot of the stuff going on. Tonight's sort of a setup, kickoff. Going to be really cool. Tomorrow I'll be doing a couple of panels about the actual animation process and how that changed in the late 90s. We'll have a panel about the music of Cowboy Bebop and a little history of Yoko Kanno. We'll have a history of Type Moon, folks who make that Fate thing you may have heard of. We'll also be talking about the rise of the Sekai K story type, as well as what it was like being an American otaku in the 90s. And then we'll also be doing I'll also be previewing, or actually not previewing, actually showing off. We're going to have like an hour-long tour of Akihabara later on in the afternoon. So you all look forward to that. Thanks very much to several different panelists who are putting these panels together, and it's going to be a lot of fun. And then tomorrow night, I'll be doing a charity auction of a whole bunch of stuff. In fact, you may see a whole pile of things back there. Some of those I'll be giving away to various lucky folks on the stream and in the chat, and that's going to be fun. And then we're also going to be doing a charity auction of a bunch of manga and anime Sunday night. All the proceeds will go to the Red Cross, who have been doing a lot of work over the past couple of years, and that will go directly to support them. So that is the plan there, and then we'll be watching Spriggan, also over on the SciTubes tomorrow, and then analyzing that Saturday night. And the reason we're doing Spriggan is that Spriggan came out in 1998 and was the last anime movie, definitely, and I think anime period, to be made entirely without computers involved at all. So no computer effects, no computer coloring, no nothing. It was all using the traditional hand-drawn process. And we'll talk a little bit about the pluses and minuses of that, kind of what they had to deal with in doing that at that period. So that's the plan. And yeah, we're gonna be moving along into some fun stuff here pretty soon in the whole anime manga world. So that's the plan. I'm already noticing there's a slight weirdness with the chat, which I'm not sure how to resolve. We will deal with that later on. Scrolling is always a little bit weird with this whole thing, but we will get it figured out at some point, hopefully. Anyway, yeah, it's just not scrolling properly, but that's fine. So, good to see a lot of folks here in the chat, being part of the whole conversation. And yeah, let's get into it a little bit. So, I want to talk a little bit about anime's history and how it's evolved over time, and the fact that the 90s was an important time for anime. And even if you're not into anime that's older, you know, even if you're a more modern otaku, you haven't really watched a lot of the older stuff, it's still very, very helpful to know what happened in the past, because that informs what you're seeing. You know, the anime that we watch today, you know, everything from you know, the new Evangelion films to Demon Slayer Mugen Train to My Life as a Villainess to, you know, Golden Kamuy, all this stuff. You know, they're all informed by what happened in these anime series and how the industry evolved over time. And you can see how trends changed as the industry evolved. Captain Laser Eyes in the chat room asks, how do you get your hands on anime before the internet? That's a really good question. I'm actually going to take a quick detour to answer that question right now. There are these things called catalogs, actually. Actually, no, there were stores. I first got my hands on anime, and I'll talk about this more in the Saturday panel, through going into Sam Goody, which was a music store back in the day, and they had a few VHS tapes of anime out there. And then later on there was Suncoast, and they had some anime. And so you really had to go to these specialty video stores. And then not necessarily, and by that I mean stores that just sold video, because it was so hard to find, you had to do it that way. And they would have a tiny little section, usually it was an animation section, and there would be a little sliver of that for anime. And you had to, you had to take whatever they could find, and then if you were lucky, you would stumble across something like Right Stuff's catalog. And they had a huge selection of anime, basically everything. They would carry everything. And you could order that through mail order. So you could either call them or literally fill out an order form and mail it to them with like a check. And they would send you anime. So that was a lot of the ways. Yeah, Suncoast, that was definitely a big one. And then Charming Sketches says also recording anything on TV. So you were very much dependent on TV schedules and TV broadcast, and that was just what you had to do. You could also, if you were lucky, you knew other people who were doing the same thing, and they had tapes, and so you could trade, and you could say, hey, I'll loan you this tape of Ranma 1/2, for example, and then I'll loan you my copy of Robotech, and we can go back and forth that way. Because even in the early days of the internet, there certainly wasn't enough bandwidth to actually download a movie file. I remember trying to download Furikuri episode 1 when it came out, and it was, gosh, that was, I think 24 hours per episode. So one episode of Furikuri would have taken 24 hours to download. That was kind of the pace of downloads at that point. And that was like SD quality, right? This was, that was not even 480p. We're talking probably like 360. And you just kind of took what you can get. The other thing to be aware of, as Becca's pointing out, is that there wasn't a lot, right? There was very little available, even subbed back then. So you were really limited to whatever you could find, and even what you could find was probably a significant chunk of the market, right? It's not like you went to Suncoast and it's like, oh, I'm only seeing half a dozen things. Where's the rest of it? It's like that's it. that's a lot of what's available out there. How did I get into anime? I will answer that question because that's a great question, and that's a perfectly fitting question for the beginning of something like OnCon. So I started out. I have kind of three answers to that question. When I was a kid, there was this TV show called Voltron, Defender of the Universe. And I grew up in the 80s, basically. And so I was watching G.I. Joe and, G1 Transformers and all those shows. And you get a really, and there was a lot for me back then. Like as a, suburban white kid, there was a lot of stuff being marketed to me. And Voltron was my show. Like that was the show I looked forward to watching every afternoon. I think because it was a combination of science fiction and fantasy, it just hit this great middle ground of being very adventurous, but being lighthearted, being upbeat in general, while also having kind of a dark undertone to it. It wasn't afraid to have relatively dark elements to it, which I appreciated. And so if you want to understand my tastes, watch Voltron, actually. Like that kind of fits a lot of what I like. Or at least when I was, 8. So the thing is, back then, I didn't know that was anime, right? There was this very clear demarcation between American animation and stuff available in other parts of the world. And to me, there was just a cartoon, right? It was just on television. So I just loved that thing, and I had the figurines. I had the full Castle playset. Yeah, I was that kid. And so I love Voltron. And then later on, in the 90s, the Sci-Fi Channel, back when it was called the Sci-Fi Channel, they used to do, actually, at first they did this thing called the Festival of Anime, where during the summers, in the doldrums of the summers, they would devote a week to showing anime during prime time. So they would show 2 movies back to back, or like a short OVA, on Monday from 6 to 9, and then, or 6 to 10, whatever, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So you get a pretty good kind of smorgasbord tasting of different anime that way, and I really like that a lot. That really exposed me to a wide variety of anime. Back when it was called Japanimation, and it was a great exposure to science fiction and fantasy stuff and just a whole bunch of stuff. Apollo Smile, yes, was absolutely one of the hosts. I particularly remember Ralph Bakshi hosted it one year, which is really neat because they let him talk about his experiences as an animator. He did Fritz the Cat and Wizards and a bunch of independent animation in America in like the 70s. And so a lot of the interstitials were just him reminiscing about his career, which is really cool. Sci-Fi Channel was awesome back in the day. I want to point that out. And I'm not saying that, recent sci-fi stuff all sucks. But Sci-Fi Channel was really, really in tune with its audience. So I got exposed to a lot of stuff. And with that, I saw Project A-ko, Dominion Tank Police, and some of the Tenchi Muyo OVA, first Tenchi Muyo OVA. And I really enjoyed that. So then I was like, okay, I understand that this is this Japanimation thing. And so I want to become a fan of this. I wasn't actively involved yet, but I was like, okay, that is now on my radar, right? It's something I want to dig into. So I did that, went to Sam Goody, and they had a VHS tape of Tenchi Muyo. Bought that, watched some of it, and then Amazon.com had just opened their DVD section. To give you an idea how long ago this was, they just started selling DVDs on Amazon. And they had on there this new thing called the Tenchi Muyo Perfect Collection, which was the first 2 OVAs, technically the first 3 OVAs because there's a 1-episode thing, for a mere $99. Actually, it was $120, I think, and Amazon's discount was $20. So I bought that, waited, 4 or 5 days for it to ship. It showed up, and it happened to show up the day before I had my wisdom teeth extracted. And boy, did that knock the wind out of me. I was not doing anything when that happened. And unfortunately, I thought I would be tough. And I didn't really need the medication. I would just go home and I'd kind of tough it out. Well, no. By the time I got home, I was like, get the thing. So I was in some of the worst pain in my life. And my mom got the medication and I got it down my throat. And I was not moving for the next day. So I popped in Tenchi Muyo OVA and watched that all the way through that day. OVA 1 and OVA 2, just that was my day. And that's what made me an anime fan. And it's not because Tenchi Muyo is the most amazing, fascinating thing in the world. I love it for a lot of nostalgic reasons. And there's definitely some great stuff in there. But Tenchi, similarly, science fantasy, right? Science fiction stuff, fantastical stuff, laser swords and beautiful women who can summon spirits out of stone, and really, really cool, interesting, imaginative stuff. And that really appealed to me, and that's when I became an anime fan. That's when I was like, okay, nope, I'm going to consume as much of this as I possibly can. I'm hooked, and that's what did it. Thank you, Captain Laser Eyes. I really appreciate that. So that's turned me into an anime fan. And that's a bit of a long explanation, but that is true. Practice Pad, I'm glad you brought that up. So I actually was having that experience earlier this week where I was feeling like I didn't want to watch any anime. Anime was just kind of a thing out there, and there was so much not so much in my queue, but there was so much where I was like, oh, I'd like to watch that, I'd like to watch that, I'd like to watch that. And I lost that mystery. And so I did the thing that I tell other people to do, and I finally did it. I went on to Crunchyroll, I went to the all anime thing, and I was actually using the app, and so it just gave me literally an alphabetical list of all the anime on Crunchyroll, and I just started skipping forward until I found something that looked interesting and I hadn't watched, and I just clicked it, and I started watching that. And the first thing I watched was Actually I Am, first episode of Actually I Am, which I had seen before. Romantic comedy. Guy discovers this beautiful girl in his class is a vampire, and he has to keep the secret, but he's terrible at keeping secrets. So, hilarity ensues. It's fine. But then, I was like, okay, whatever. Skip down a little bit. Let me try this one. And I got the first episode of Amagi Brilliant Park. And I'm now 2/3 of the way through Amagi Brilliant Park. Because it was just such a neat, interesting, unusual anime series. It's not like mind-blowing. It's not like every 5 minutes it upends your thoughts about reality. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I'd heard of Amagi Brilliant Park. It's a Kyoto Animation show. I'd heard good things about it, but it was just not up there on my list. But by just stumbling across it, I really enjoyed it because it had that mystery. It had that, oh, let me just try this out. Oh, I actually wanted this. I didn't know I wanted this until I did it. Lord Admiral is saying you saw Vampire Hunter D rebroadcast on local low-power TV station in the early 90s. Yep, absolutely. And that's the other thing, is understand, a lot of early anime fans got into anime because, and when I say early anime fans, there were certainly anime fans in the 60s and 70s and 80s and such. But fandom really exploded in the 90s. And so during that period, a lot of the ways that we stumbled across it was because the local station needed content, and anime was cheap. So they would just grab something and show it late nights, every Thursday night, because why not? And so you just find these odd finds in the middle of the night or whatever. And then a lot of Dragon Ball Z, absolutely. Toonami is one of the major factors responsible for the anime boom of the 90s. They exposed a lot of kids to not just Dragon Ball Z and Sailor Moon, but also stuff like Ronin Warriors. Anime series that would not have had a huge following or a huge audience in America or the U.S. Without that cable broadcast. And just got people interested in this. What is this thing? This is so interesting. This is so weird. This is not G.I. Joe, or whatever. And Cherami Sketches is absolutely right. The thing about it is that because there was so little of it, you kind of watched what you had a lot, so you got very familiar with it. And that is something that I think is different now. That back then you built passion because you had to dig into the anime that you watched. You watched that, grainy copy of Dominion Tank Police, maybe a couple of times one weekend, just over and over, and then you come back to it a couple weeks later, and by the time you're talking to other people about it, you'd watch that 4 or 5 times, and so you were really familiar with it. You did get into all that stuff, and yeah, exactly. Pokemon, Digimon. I'm sure a lot of kids growing up now are not initially aware that Pokemon is a Japanese show. It's just about kids running around with monsters. But yeah, it just provides that space. And by the way, I try to remind people. I remember when Pokemon came out in America, and I remember not only the moral panic around it, but amongst normies, but also the reaction against true Pokemon fans. I remember seeing on the internet a woman complaining because she was a real fan of Pokemon, and now Pokemon was going to be broadcast on air, and it was going to be seen by all these children, and children were going to watch it. They weren't going to see they were going to be real Pokemon fans like she was, because she knew about it before it was popular, and it's so. Yeah, and Pokemon was, a lot of people were very much afraid, a lot of otaku were afraid that Pokemon would kind of dilute the anime industry. That all these kids would watch Pokemon and they kind of overwhelm the industry, and they wouldn't bring over any adult titles anymore. It would just all be Pokemon, Digimon, Monster Rancher. That would just be the entire anime industry. And turns out that didn't happen. So GameEscape, the question about Sailor Moon and its role in popularizing anime in the late 90s. Great question. Same kind of thing with Dragon Ball Z. DBZ and Sailor Moon are both properties that were brought over in bits and pieces in America and were shown on different stations in early morning slots. I remember local WDCA TV, Channel 20, would show Dragon Ball Z at 7:30 in the morning. Just there because they could. They grabbed a copy of Dragon Ball Z and they just showed that. And it wasn't hugely popular, but it was there. Same thing with Sailor Moon. And so because it had been around for a while, it kind of built up that knowledge in people's heads. And then when it came on Toonami, you had the advantage that not only was it broadly accessible, a lot of people were like, oh yeah, my older sister watched this a couple of years ago. Oh yeah, I remember seeing this on TV. So it was a lot easier to get into because it had a bit of a reputation at that point. So that really, really, really helped. It just brought in a lot of that. It also helped that Sailor Moon was one of the more heavily revisioned anime in America, and because that stuff spread throughout fandom, there was this aspect of discovery, where if you got into Sailor Moon, you learned about this original version that had all these differences from what you had seen. And that's it's a very effective way of mobilizing a fan base, is to create secrets. Or to have secrets that folks discover, and now I'm a part of the secret club, right, that knows about the thing between these two, Sailor Scouts and all that stuff. And that's, that definitely was a big factor, that you were part of the secret initiation that learned all this kind of stuff. But yeah, it was very interesting. Same thing with Robotech, by the way. That was a lot of, I think, what happened with Robotech, is that folks were like, oh, there were these changes originally. And that was a little bit different because with Robotech, there was so little information about what had changed that people thought that the changes to Robotech were much more extensive than they were. Whereas with Sailor Moon, there were clear changes in the story and the character relationships. You could point to and say, okay, that's definitely not that, right? And yeah, Absolute Electronic Sketches, it was very, it was much harder to connect with otaku. I did not know any other anime fans for a very long time. In fact, most of the anime fans I knew were kids. Younger than me. I was in my 20s when I really got into anime seriously, and I didn't know anyone else in my 20s that liked anime. But then you had other things. You could connect with folks on the internet. I think the first real anime fan that I became friends with was on IRC, Internet Relay Chat, which was just a text-only service, and the Sci-Fi Channel had set that up for their own online anime convention. By the way, this ties in very nicely. One of the reasons I do OnCon is a kind of in memoriam of sci-fi.con, which was an online anime convention the Sci-Fi Channel put on back in 1996, I think. And they did that every year for a couple of years, and I was there. I actually helped contribute a little game to that one year, and that was just a very important part of my life. I was that IRC server, that community. I was very deeply part of for a long time. It was very much part of my growing up, and so a lot of what I do kind of comes out of my experiences there. And yeah, so looking back up through the questions, why do some people say, I think anime is weird and the people who watch it are weirdos? Partly because anime is weird. Right? Let's be honest, I mentioned Amagi Brilliant Park. If you've seen the opening shot of Amagi Brilliant Park, it's kind of weird, even by anime standards. You look at Pokemon, right? You look at, this idea of kids running around, like preteen kids running around a world with these giant dragon creatures and all this stuff. They like breathe fire. Everyone's like, oh yeah, go on, little Johnny, go on your adventure. That's so cute. A lot of the premises are just very bizarre, and even further, anime comes from a very different cultural perspective than Westerners have. So a lot of the themes being explored are just not themes you would explore in just regular TV in here. And I'm not necessarily saying that anime is always deeper or more complex. I'm just saying the outlook on the world is a little different because it's a very different culture. So I think it is, it is that, and thus it's very easy to jump to say, well, people who watch this thing that is not, I'm not used to, I'm not familiar with, are weird, and there is something bizarre about them. That's the problem, right? It's fine to acknowledge that this thing is different than what I'm used to, but then when you tar and feather those fans just because they like something that's unusual, that's where it becomes a problem. Yeah, couldn't like Pokemon because people thought it was bad. That's another interesting thing, actually, Ginger, about stuff around fandom, because there was a lot of insecurity in early fandom because it was new, because it was a fairly small thing. There's this idea that, oh, this thing's gonna kill anime, and you get and because a lot of anime fans, once you get to the Toonami generation, let's be honest, Cartoon Network was being watched by a younger audience by and large. So a lot of the new fans were very young, relatively speaking. And so younger people are very status conscious. And they're very much concerned. If their peer group says that this thing is for babies, then I can't be seen to watch this thing. And it is very, very, very common. And so that also shaped a lot of things of what kind of was and wasn't acceptable to talk about or to watch or whatever. And it ended up driving a lot of those things underground. The folks who were like, Pokemon's for little children, they kept on watching Pokemon. They just wouldn't talk to their friends about it. So it's weird. That's just how that evolved over there. A lot of the anime witnessed down the cultural barrier. It is also down to the fact that a lot of anime series do have, I want to say, oddball premises, right? Anime is a lot of anime is meant to be fantastical in the broader sense. It's not meant to be realistic, right? It is a playful medium in a lot of ways. Look at One Piece, right? Pirates of the Caribbean, it is not, and that's okay, right? It is very much that. And the thing is, it's also kind of like comparing Fantasia to Bugs Bunny. Right? Those are two very different approaches to the medium, and a lot of folks look at anime through the lens of, again, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, whatever iteration of that you're a fan of, because boy, that has been through any number of evolutions, and it can be very goofy. But you compare that with, harem anime, and it's like, what's going on here? But yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's this whole cultural mainstream thing. Fortunately, we now live in a world where people understand fandom. Like back, I think up until around the 2000s, there was a stigma against fandom. Period. You could be a fan, you could be a sports fan, that was fine, but being passionate about things beyond that was seen as kind of suspect. And it was very frustrating because we saw people who, plastered their houses in, San Francisco 49ers memorabilia. But if we had 3, anime things laying around, then we were the weird ones. Which is not a new argument, but it's a thing that definitely was very big back then. And now I think, obviously there's still stigma, but it's less, people understand that connection, that a rabid sports fan is not that different than a rabid comics fan, right, or whatever. So it's kind of weird. You have a lot of morality system and cultural differences. And Lord Admiral brings up a point, and I want to keep this, work friendly, for at least a little while, but Japanese laws around what was and wasn't legal were not as specific as they were. So certain things that are now illegal were still legal back then. They just weren't. There just wasn't a specific law against them. They were under sort of larger, broader laws, and it took a while for that to kind of get nailed down in Japan and be made explicit. And that's the kind of thing people are like, oh my gosh, you don't have a law against that. How dare you? How awful. Well, it's still illegal. We just call it by a different name, right? So that's that's a cultural difference that folks just aren't aware of. So yeah, that's the thing. And the funny thing there is, and actually Olimar is bringing up a thing about shonen. There's even that within anime fandom, right? Like when I look at a lot of anime fans aren't really anime fans; they are shonen fans, right? And I'm nothing against shonen, right? They're shonen fans. The shonen shows I love, but there are a lot of folks who really don't watch anything other than shonen within anime, but they act like that is all there is in anime. And it's kind of hard to talk to them because it's like, you like this or you like this. So I only watch shows where 14-year-olds get really mad and punch each other, and it's like that's okay, right? It's like fine, but there's a galaxy of stuff out there. So that's one of the things I find kind of odd. That even with anime fandom, there are kind of these, not purists, but there are definitely folks who are like, no, this is it. This is my fandom. It's like, well, yeah. We can be a little broader than that. Yeah, and you're right, Lord Admiral. I mean, you certainly saw more anime references in mainstream stuff start to show up again. 1 week the Sailor Moon reference and a lot of other stuff like that. And it's kind of weird. And that was again people starting to acknowledge this fandom and saying this is the thing that's out there. And yeah, and that's the thing. And I totally get that practice pad. There are genres I can't get into either. And people say, oh, you should, this is amazing. It's like, well, that's okay. So yeah, it's weird. And then Sanpu brings up Miyazaki, and boy, is that an interesting topic, because Miyazaki was an interesting element because Miyazaki didn't get official in America until the late 90s when so basically until Mononoke came out in America, Miyazaki was this legendary figure who made these amazing movies. And the problem is none of it was ever licensed because of the whole thing with Warriors of the Wind. Look that up. But you couldn't find his movies. So you knew his movies were amazing, but you had to get fan subs of them, like tape trading. You had to see it in a theater at a con or something. And man, it's weird. Because people respected him and understood him, but then once the Miramax deal came in and Miyazaki became a big deal, he became, for a lot of people, kind of that vanguard of anime. He was what you showed to your parents. He's what you showed to people who are like, I want to get into anime. You'd show them Kiki, or you'd show them Totoro or whatever, and they go, oh, that's great. But the thing about those movies is that they're not traditional anime. Miyazaki does not make anime that's anything like regular anime. He makes, animated films. And so it became this weird cul-de-sac where you say, anime is amazing because Kiki's. And it's like, well, but Kiki's isn't anime. Again, it depends on how you define it, but, it's not really representative of most TV anime series. So I just kind of created this unfortunate situation in the middle of all that was going on. Yeah. But yeah. And I mean, Miyazaki himself will tell you that he doesn't make anime. He doesn't like to define himself as somebody who makes anime. The thing is, even in Japan, Miyazaki is an exception. Like, he is this very well respected figure who does, you know, great stuff, and everyone loves his stuff. But there's generally an understanding in Japan that he is a special figure, and that his stuff is not what you should. It's not the you know, it's not what we should expect when we turn on TV Asahi at 8 p.m. Lord Admiral, I don't know what you mean by Machekization, because Carl Machek edited as little as possible, and he was editing for television. I think Machek is, you know, editing for television is a thing that's always been there. And it's been there, I mean, HBO series get edited for television. You know, I think that is a thing that's been around for a very long time. You know, when Machek did Our Battle at Dunbean, he went straight to DVD, so he didn't change anything, right? He didn't rewrite anything. So I don't, you know, I don't see why using his name is useful in that context, because he was doing the same thing that people have been doing to media for decades, and he wasn't doing it consistently. So I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. I'm very aware of what Robotech is. I've seen every frame removed and changed for Robotech, and it's not totally changed plots. I recommend, Lord Admiral, you go back and watch both Robotech and the original shows, and yes, they added things, but the story of Southern Cross is that's the story. Like that's those characters have that same journey in that, and change any of that stuff. We're reading good textbooks that details the history of manga and anime. There is a good thing. There's a book called Anime History. I will get it over here. It's by Jonathan Clements, and unfortunately, Jonathan Clements has a lot of people in the industry that he talks to get a lot of his information, and so a lot of the information in here that he refers to is from interviews with folks that he just kind of talked to personally. So he can't like point you to the published article in which this person said this thing. So it's a little hard to verify exactly some of the stuff there. And I'm not saying don't trust him. I'm just saying that a lot of books will have, you know, huge numbers of sources in there, and he definitely has his sources. But whenever somebody's kind of relaying what somebody else told you, there's always a certain amount of explaining, you know, what they said, not necessarily in exact quotes. You got to be, you know, aware of all that kind of stuff. And the thing is, that this is a really helpful. It focuses more on like the early 20th century, partly because that has not been in a lot of. It's not been around a lot. It's not been documented a lot in English. But that's really helpful. You know, the anime has become somewhat incestuous. Anime creators aren't taking enough sources outside of anime. Olimar, I don't think that is new. I think anime has been a very self-referential medium since 1963. You know, the vast majority of anime made in the 60s were just straight adaptations of manga. Just let's do the manga. Now sometimes it would be, okay, let's do that thing, and then we're gonna write 20 new storylines in here, but it was also just episodic, same character, same thing, just we can come up with new stories in that. So I'm not convinced that the modern anime industry is all that, you know, all that more problematic than it ever has been. Part of the problem is that anime's gone through, you know, a lot of changes. So like the 80s, for example, was a period of a lot of experimentation in anime. There's a lot of cool, weird stuff happening. The 70s saw some really cool stuff happening in anime as well. I would say probably the 70s through the 90s were a period of a lot of experimentation. Why? Look at Japan. You know, after World War II, it took Japan a while to kind of build up, but then by the 70s, You had the Japanese economic miracle, and there was lots of money flowing around. You had the 80s and the big Japanese boom, economic boom. So of course there was a lot of experimentation in anime. Of course folks were doing a lot of stuff, because there was just money galore to throw at any weird concept folks wanted to do. Otaku would just snap them up, right? Whatever you make, otaku would buy. And then the 90s and the 2000s come in, and suddenly there's austerity, and suddenly you can't just sell anything. And people complain because Moe shows up, and anime turns into these easily saleable slice of life things. And it's like, but we're not in the same market that we were 20 years ago. You can't sell random experimental stuff in 2005 anymore. There's just not, people aren't buying that now. So I'm just not, I'm not convinced that is kind of a useful argument for things, because people gotta look back at these halcyon days and like, oh, it was better back then. But it's like, I've not been seeing Osamatsu-san, no. Stuff on manga. They are quite linked, that is very true, McPuffin. Let me see. There are a bunch. I would probably start here. This is also good. I think. Where is so my kind of go-tos there. So this is kind of a weird. Manga the Complete Guide is basically a bunch of reviews from Jason Thompson. Reviews a huge amount of manga. It's a review guide, right? It's like, oh, okay, whatever. But there are 900 manga listed in here. So you get a good idea of the breadth of manga with a book like this. But the other ones I'd really recommend are two things. One is called Manga 60 Years of Japanese Comics by Paul Gravett. What's great about this is that it's very, very, it's got lots of illustrations in it. It's like a coffee table book. So you get to see a lot of things. I gotta be very careful about this, because it's about all manga. Yep, all manga. So there's some Astro Boy stuff. Whoops. And it does a good job of explaining a whole bunch and looking at things like how do comics change as a result of World War II and all that kind of stuff. And you can actually see visual examples of all that. This manga was actually pulled off of the shelves at a library in Alaska, I think. And people were horrified that people were censoring it. Not like it was burned or anything, just you had to request it. It was in the stacks in the back. And the reason for that is because this is about all manga. All genres of manga. Not just the more adult things, but also the horrific horror stuff, the body horror and so forth. And there are illustrations of that in this book. So yeah, be aware, there's some very disturbing imagery in this book. But really helpful. The other one I really, really recommend is called Adult Manga. This is a book written by Sharon Kinsella. She actually went over to Japan and worked in the publishing industry in Japan for quite a while, and got an eye on the actual business of selling manga. And so this is not so much a history, it's more like this is what the business is like. This is how this is how people are involved in manga. That's really, really helpful. So yeah. So those are some books I definitely recommend on that. Dokuro-chan I actually have some issues with, but that is just me. Tezuka, obviously the godfather of anime and modern a lot of modern manga. Well, like I said, Omar, Miyazaki doesn't consider his movies anime either. He has said that publicly and in print multiple times. So yeah, that's a thing to be aware of. So history. So and that's the thing. Getting back to the point about manga and anime being interrelated, it's worth noting that the first anime were all manga adaptations. It really starts with Astro Boy in 1963. There were animations before, but that was really it was the first half-hour weekly TV all animated series, and it was hugely popular and got people saying, okay, let's adapt this manga into an anime. Let's adapt this manga into animation, and led to this big boom in anime. And then it wasn't until the 70s that you started seeing a lot of evolution of the medium, of people telling original stories in anime, people telling more serious stories in anime. It was pretty much all kids stuff until that point. Like, it was all kids stuff until that point, just straight up. But then you started getting shows like, Space Battleship Yamato, aka Star Blazers over here. Stuff like Captain Harlock, Galaxy Express 39s, shows that could be dramatic, melodramatic, but that could be more serious. Characters could die, sacrifice themselves, so forth and so on. And then you get into the 80s with the economic boom and the rise of the otaku, who were now a market you could sell to. So you can now make anime aimed at people who are actually going to go out and buy merch. They're going to buy the VHS tapes. They were going to buy the soundtracks, and that really changed anime in very fundamental ways. And again, kind of the one funny thing is that there are people who bemoaned that. There are people who complained that anime was becoming just for these otaku when it used to be this pure form of childhood entertainment. It certainly had marketing behind it, right? They were still selling toys off of these things, but this idea that now you were basically making anime for basement dwelling geeks back in the 80s, kind of horrified some industry insiders and viewers. But again, it's kind of the evolution of things. So yeah, it's remarkable. And then the 90s come along as this kind of turning point where the anime is, or the 80s had all this money. You could be experimental. You could make things that were strange or very much aimed at a particular demographic. And then with the 90s, with the bubble bursting, there was still anime in the industry. There's still anime kind of flowing in because anime was still making a lot of money. But people had to be a lot more careful about what they were making. There had to be a lot more. There had to be a reason why you were making an anime series. You couldn't just throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. Which is why you got shows like Cowboy Bebop back there. Because Bebop was a show made by a group that had really proven themselves with Macross Plus and other things. And they were basically told, hey, here, make a thing. And people were just very impressed with their previous work. So they were able to give a lot of free reign. And you also got stuff like Serial Experiments Lain, which is much more experimental but cheap. You could do strange things in the 90s as long as you weren't trying to break the budget with it. And so Lain succeeded in that sense because it aired in the middle of the night. It was a cheap time slot. They did not spend a lot of money on things. There is a shot in Lain of this sort of ghostly figure in a parking lot. And according to the staff, that is literally, I think, either the director or the producer with a sheet over his head, getting filmed on like a Sony Handycam and then passed through a bunch of filters so it doesn't look like a guy in a sheet. That was just how you do that, right? Okay, we need this shot. How do we do that? Okay, throw a sheet over your head. We're going to film you real quick. And then just throw a bunch of filters onto it. So, yeah, Kyoto Animation, they were not, right? Satoshi Kon was the 90s. And again, he was somebody who, a good example there. Satoshi Kon was working in anime a lot. He'd done some manga work. And then he came along, started working on an adaptation of Perfect Blue, which was an existing story. And they were originally going to do live action. The live action version fell apart, and so they decided to make an anime because anime was cheaper. Anime would be way cheaper than live action. That tells you something. So that's how he made his first film, was because, okay, well, we can just make an anime. Because the money wasn't there, if you will, but that turned out to be the perfect medium for that, and that kickstarted his career as a director. But yeah, he was a mangaka before that. He was a professional manga creator for several years before doing anime. That was his profession. In fact, he talks about how weird it is after Perfect Blue took off. Whenever he was interviewed, folks were like, "What's going to be your next movie?" No one ever asked him about his manga after Perfect Blue. No one ever thought he'd go back to manga after making a movie. And he was like, I thought of myself as primarily a mangaka who made movies, who had made a movie and might make movies in the future. Just that success, boom, you go. What Will anime be like in 20 years or even further in the future? I think we're definitely going to see um, the use of CGI kind of mellow out. We're going to see that middle ground with CGI. I think CGI has now become we've now kind of found where it makes sense, if you will, to slot CGI into the pipeline for things like cars, fighter jets, things along those lines, hard mechanical objects. It just really makes sense to do those in CGI. And so I think we're gonna, that's kind of what that's gonna be. But I think we've also seen that CGI characters are really hard to do well. And so what we're gonna see, I think, is either stuff like Land of the Lustrous or Beastars, which are CGI but very stylized, right? They are very much intentionally doing something with that medium, visually. Or you'll have hand-drawn characters with kind of CGI assist. Girls and Panzer, I think, is a great example of how to mesh those two very well. So I think all that's going to kind of settle out over the next few years. I think we're definitely seeing a transition back to sci-fi and fantasy. I think isekai is leading the charge on that. Isekai is starting to not quite peter out, but we're starting to see the evolution of isekai series. Right, 2 or 3 years ago, every isekai series was basically the same plot, and now we're seeing twists on that plot, changes around that plot. And so that's starting to disperse out and change and so forth. So we'll see kind of whatever is the next big thing after isekai will come in the next few years, and that'll shift things around. But you never predict that. You can never know what's going to be the next trend, right, in genre. What's going to be the next big genre? It always comes out of nowhere. The most seminal anime of the 90s, that is hard to say. Really the big one, Evangelion. That was seminal. Ironically, it was kind of seminal accidentally. I have complicated feelings about Evangelion, and part of the problem is that Evangelion has a complicated reputation, right? A lot of people misunderstand Evangelion. I misunderstood Evangelion for a very long time. And Eva is Eva perfectly captured the zeitgeist of Japan at the time. I liken it to Titanic, right? Where Titanic it's a fine film, but nobody can point to that film and say that I can see exactly why that film was the most absurdly popular film of its year. It just was, right? It just hit. It was all sorts of things that all came together at the right time, and Eva was very much that. And Evangelion was also important because it really brought in with it, and it was emblematic of a real change in the kinds of stories being told in anime, which I will talk about tomorrow in my Sekai K panel. Because really the anime was shifting its focus, and general Japanese sort of pop culture entertainment was also shifting its focus in terms of what kinds of stories it was telling. Shifting into something more psychological, more focused on the individual main character. And so you definitely see that shifting in at the time. And it's weird because Evangelion is a Evangelion is important, and it was massively popular at the time, but I don't think anyone at the time could have predicted that it would be as much of a fixture as it is, right? Like, you can understand it being popular and people remembering it, but the idea that it would be this kind of mainstay of fandom for decades is really kind of remarkable. That it's not just, oh yeah, this thing came out and it was good and you should watch it. It's, it's that thing where people are like, not only do you have to watch Eva, you have to watch it multiple times, like it's a really big deal. It's been a big deal for a really, really long time. And that's just different. Just not your typical anime series. And again, this is the thing, is that you have to do, you have to understand that most anime is like most American television. It is disposable entertainment for kind of the masses. And I don't mean that in a wholly negative sense. I mean, it is meant to be light entertainment people watch and laugh at, or maybe cry at, or whatever, and then they move on to the next thing. It's fine. Most anime is not meant to be dense and complicated because that's not what sells. But Eva worked. Eva managed to combine those two things. But you generally can't do that, right? That's the thing. What do you think about Razafon? I've only watched episode 1 of Razafon. A friend of mine watched it and said that it is sort of Evangelion done right, in the sense that a lot of the missteps that Evangelion made, that are unavoidable anytime you're doing something creative, right? Creativity is not linear, right? And so I think Razafon is kind of looking back at Evangelion and saying, okay, how could we tell that story? How could we tell a similar kind of story? How could we deal with those kinds of themes, and not fall down in the ways that Evangelion fell down? So that is that. But again, I haven't seen it, so I don't want to comment and say, well, this is what Razafon actually accomplished. But that was very much the intent, and that, from what I've heard from other people, it managed to do that. Now, I think Razafon is one of those series where, because it is very much following a pattern, and it's not like Evangelion version 2, because it's very much following a pattern, you can kind of see those patterns more easily. It doesn't have that kind of raw, creative emotion that Evangelion sometimes has. McPuffin has a question. The answer is yes. The new UW worth watching. That is, boy, Ginger. I can answer this for you. I really like the new dub. Everyone felt like the characters. They get it right. And also importantly, understand that the rebuild movies, that's not exactly the same character, right? They are intentionally shifting the characters a little bit. To, again, the rebuild movies are basically Eva 2.0. It is, okay, let's rethink this. Let's come in, and which, by the way, that numbering system, in retrospect, is actually correct. Eva 1.0 is, let's go back to Eva and just reanimate it. But we're going to condense it and simplify it. Not simplify it. We're going to condense it so that it is the plot lines flow more cleanly in that first movie. And then 2.0 is, let's rethink Eva. How would I do Eva today, basically. And then 3.0, and then 3.0, 1.0, right, all that kind of stuff. I enjoy dubs too. And I think they did a really good job of understanding those characters and approaching them correctly in that. And the young man who does the new Shinji is brilliant. Shinji is a difficult character to do well because he is so hated by so many fans. And he is deliberately broken. And he is very deliberately not just annoying, but his behaviors are very intentional. You are not supposed to like Shinji in that show. And so I think he does a really good job of capturing that in a way that, gets across that character well. Yeah, I can't imagine why he's hated. So one of the complicated things about Evangelion is that a lot of those... So for those curious about Eva, one of the things about Eva is it was very much a reaction to anime and fandom in general. So Gendo Ikari is very much an inversion of the stereotypical mecha father figure who bestows the mecha on his son or grandson or nephew or whatever, right? That whole trope of the the bearded inventor father figure in the Super Robot show of the 70s that invents this robot underneath Mount Fuji and hands it off to his son, grandson, whatever in episode 1. Gendo Ikari is an inversion of that. Shinji is an otaku. He is a young man who is very shy and doesn't get along well with people and kind of doesn't want to really interact with the world. And by the way, that's not my analysis. That is from Anno's mouth. That is what Shinji was meant to be. Was Shinji is his view of an otaku of 1995, and so he is meant to be, a pathetic figure, and I don't mean pathetic in the purely negative sense. I mean in the pathos, right? That he is not in a great spot, but also you're supposed to feel bad about that. So it's different. So yeah, and folks have this reaction like, how dare you make this character that is this broken and doesn't want to get into the robot? And he's like, well, I think Anno's response to that would be, well, how active are you in your life? The average anime fan, like how many world changing things are you doing in your life? Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, exactly. He's meant to be cringy. That's the very much the intent of the character. And to be clear, I am not saying that is a smart decision to make as an anime creator. I totally understand why people hate that. I appreciate that. That is an annoying thing, but that is creator's intent, right? It's just kind of separating, as a consumer, I don't like this, recognizing that's the creator's intent, and it doesn't mean I have to like it, right? But it's just, that explains why they did it, right? Yeah. I completely agree, Ginger. I think one of the problems is a lot of people subconsciously see themselves in Shinji and are repulsed by it. Not you, not the people here, right? But I think a lot of people are. There was an anime series a while back about otaku that I found hilarious, and I cannot remember it for the life of me. And I found a lot of people who were like, oh, I hated that show. I couldn't stand that show. I was like, oh, I see why, Ikuhara is absolutely the 90s. Ikuhara was Sailor Moon, and then Utena, which was 1998. So yes, absolutely. Charmy, that's brilliant. You're absolutely right. Everyone hates Edmund, but we are all Edmund. Edmund literally is the fall of man. Edmund is the fact that we all give in to our temptations to not do the right thing and to stay home and eat sweets. Is there anyone out here who hasn't run away from a problem at some point in the past, or who's given in to something? That is what Edmund is, and that's why he is how he is. Yeah, that's absolutely true. It was not Cromartie High School. It was recent. It was in the past couple of years, I think, that there was some like otaku show like an otaku character in an anime series, and they were like, I don't know. How are cons from the 90s different from cons today? That's a great question. I did not attend any cons until 2001. So I'm not directly. I wasn't directly involved in those, but it was I was a few years away. So that's the thing, is that one of the things that made cons in the earlier on different is the fact that there was a different sense of shared camaraderie. You were finding your people at an anime con more so than you are today, because there's so much anime now, and because there are so many different interests now. You go to a con, and you're presented with so many different things, so many different fandoms, so many different interests. It's like, okay, whatever. And that was something that you had less of in the 90s and that period. You didn't feel like you were part of the club necessarily. Like, you'd still definitely be, feel kind of on the outside. But there was this sense of, this feels that. And yeah, you had much smaller cons too. My first con was Otakon 2001, so it was a very odd experience because it was kind of big. Well, it was very big by anime con standards at the time, but it was also just in this giant convention. Well, half of a giant convention center, so it was its own experience in that sense. And yes, Charmy, it was it's not your. Can't you tell it's my fault? Can't you tell that it's your fault that I'm unpopular? That was the otaku show that people just despise, and I was like, But yeah. Yeah, it's really weird. Speaking of 2001 then, sure. So I went to the 2001 Otakon for one reason and one reason only. That was the Serial Experiments Lane Otakon. They literally got most of the creative staff of Lane. They got the executive producer, they got who's basically one of the creators, Yoshishi Abe, the character designer. They got the folks who did the opening theme song to it, and literally Otakon was all themed around Lane. Like the website was themed around Lane, the booklet was themed around Lane, all of that stuff, and I love Lane, and that was, and so I went, and so I attended all the Lane panels, literally, with a friend of mine, and it was weird because it was all these people here for this anime thing that I'd only experienced personally. I had made some friends, on the internet and such who were into it as well, and so we'd met up once or twice. But this was being around all those folks and having access to merchandise. That was one of the big draws too. Is in the dealer's room you had access to a vastly larger availability of stuff. Still not a lot of DVDs and at the time VHS tapes and such. Certainly more, but it was more merch. It was more plushies and keychains and things like that. A lot of anime cells you could buy. So if you wanted to buy the actual art behind anime, which we'll get to tomorrow, that was the thing. Outlaw Star was very popular once it came out on Cartoon Network. Yeah, that was everyone knew what Outlaw Star was. In fact, I remember, the first panel I ever did was some years later. This would have been maybe 10, 11 years ago. And it was an Amazingly Obscure Anime panel. And afterwards, I polled the audience for anime that they thought I should add to the panel. What are some obscure anime that you're aware of? And one guy said, I came across this anime called Outlaw Star that no one seems to have heard of, and you should add that to your panel. And I remember going, thank you. And next, and going, nope. People know what Outlaw Star is. Not everybody, but it's not as obscure as you think it is. Yeah, Bebop, definitely a seminal 90s anime. Trigun as well. At Anime Con, you got a lot of merch. And the other thing that was different is that random people would walk in. Security wasn't really a thing back then. So we would have crazy people off the street walk in and ask random questions at panels. I remember that happening at one of the music panels. It was just very odd, and eventually he found his way out. He offered to jam with the musicians. So that was different. Strange. I remember when they aired on Toonami, when LSA aired on Toonami, and they addressed publicly the Hot Spring episode because that came out, and they publicly said, we watched the Hot Spring episode. It has nothing to do with anything. It is purely an excuse to show the female characters in a lot of skin. It does not further the plot at all. We have no problems giving that episode. They were just like, we own that and we're fine with it. Like that. It's like, dang, thank you for being very upfront about no. Craziest answer I got into the Obscure Anime panel. Outlaw Star was honestly the one. That was one where it's no, people know what that was. There were a few others at that panel where folks recommended stuff where I'm like, no, that's something people have heard of, but it wasn't as big as all of that. I have had one of the problems with Obscure Anime panels is you get people who will try to one up you, who think this is a contest about how much obscure anime they know, and they'll go, I've seen that one. And it's good? I'm fine with that. I don't care how much anime you've seen. That's awesome if you have or you haven't, whatever. But yeah, so we occasionally get some of that stuff. Yeah. So yeah, for that one, I'm trying to remember any really weird panel answer Q&A things I had. So the one that does leap to mind. I'm surprised I got out of this one unscathed. I was doing a panel about a history of anime, and I talked about how Moe became a thing in the 2000s. And there was a guy, backtracking. I talked about the importance of Macross in early anime fandom as kind of this rallying cry around for anime fans in Japan in the '80s, and then it's piece in Robotech for American fans. And there's a guy like really high volume in the crowd. And I was like, and he said, my favorite anime, man, great. I was like, cool, awesome, good for you. I didn't say this because I'm like, calm down, it's fine. And then I started talking about Moe, and he goes, and he was clearly, Moe is the worst thing that ever happened. And then I got to a point in the panel where I had researched this line, or I had rehearsed this line, and this was part of the whole thing, was explaining that Moe was kind of this evolution of the industry, and that there had been Moe characters for a long time. And I said, when you think about it, Moe, in the sense of an attractive, cute girl that you're supposed to feel good about, they've been in anime a long time. You think about it, Lin Minmay in Macross was a Moe character. I would not have been surprised to see him scramble over the chairs and physically attack me. He was staring daggers in my eyes that I would dare suggest that there was some connection between Macross and the hated scourge that was Moe. I honestly expected to go outside and have him follow me around or slash my tires or something. That would not have been out of the question. Fortunately, he just kind of sat there and simmered for the rest of the panel and then left. But it's kind of like, dude. Yeah, absolutely. Urusei Yatsura is a Moe show. Runko Takahashi's stuff is all very Moe. So that was one that stood out where I was like, I could actually be in trouble here. But fortunately he was fine. Yeah, exactly. See here. Is coming back up. Yeah, but I am lucky that I've had good experiences in cons, or in panels. The other side of that coin is I'll never forget doing a panel about kind of something around the psychology of anime and how anime can be helpful as a thing, and anime that kind of is important to you and so forth. And afterwards there was a guy there, and he was, I don't know, 19, 20, and he had a kid with him, boy of 8 or 9. I don't know, maybe the guy was a little younger. And he was listening very interestedly, and then afterwards I opened up for questions, and he raised his hand. He said, "I'm really glad you did this panel because anime saved my life. A few years ago, I was in a really bad place as a person, and I might not have made it out of that." And everyone's, you can hear a pin drop. It gets real quiet. And he says, and then I watched Gurren Lagann. He says, and as cheesy as it is, when Kamina said, "Don't believe in you, believe in me who believes in you," that snapped me out of it. That's what I needed to hear to give me hope and to keep me going. And he said, and as a result of that, I have gotten out of the situation I was in. I have gotten my younger brother, who is the kid next to him, who he pats on the shoulder. I'm getting him out of that situation, and I have kind of turned my life around because of anime. And I'm sitting there going, what do you say? How do you react to that? Thank you very much for sharing that. It's amazing. So I thanked him and so forth and so on. But that was one of those things where everyone's like, this is a moment, man. We are experiencing a thing. And that was actually pretty transformative for me. I've done panels now where I've been able to kind of acknowledge this fact that anime is... We all have those experiences, right, where we hear a line in an anime and we act on it and we behave differently. There's definitely anime that's changed my life. Very much for the better. But it's something we generally don't acknowledge, and I'm much more open about sharing that and sharing the fact that there's anime that I have watched that literally just changed my behavior. I don't do those things anymore. So that's that was pretty amazing. That was the high point, I think, in terms of things. Well, then the other high point, more from a professional perspective, is that I did a brief history of Mecha panel a couple of years ago, and this was at Anime USA. And as I was doing the panel and preparing, I looked up and saw walking down the aisle and then taking a seat was Crispin Freeman. If you're not familiar, Crispin Freeman has been an anime voice actor since Slayers in the 90s. He's been in a vast number of anime, and he takes his job really effing seriously. He got into anime as a fan who said, he talks about how he loves, animation stories for adults about serious things and things that explore serious things. He got into anime for all that stuff, all the stuff we're talking about. That, oh my gosh. And then he was also an actor, so he got into anime voice acting as a result of this. And he does panels about mythology in anime and how mythological things expand in anime or explored in anime. And he has actually been an inspiration for me in the panels I've done. Seeing some of the panels he's done that are very well researched. How do the things in mecha, how do the tropes of mecha relate to mythological stories in Japan, all this kind of stuff. And he sat down and he attended that mecha panel that I did and asked questions and then yeah, exactly. Admira. He did voice acting mastery, and then and you want nervousness? You try doing a panel for a man who has inspired you and is just watching you with full attention. Crispin Freeman does not screw around. He was sitting there, phone away, looking at me, looking at my slides for an hour, just straight up. Talk about intimidating. And not negatively, just he was here to listen to this panel. This was what he was here to do. He was going to do that for this panel. And somehow I got through it. I don't know how. And then afterwards, somebody asked a question. They asked me, what will be the next big trend in mecha? And I had to answer kind of like I answered earlier. I don't know, right? No one can predict the next big trend. It always comes out of nowhere. We can talk about general stuff about, again, evolution of CGI, whatever, but we can't really say, oh, this is going to be the next big thing. If humans could do this, it would be a very different world. And after all of that, Crispin stood up, walked up to me, and stuck his hand out, and shook my hand and thanked me for doing the panel. And we chatted for a couple of minutes about things. He actually asked what were my sources, where did I hear about this stuff. I talked about that a little bit, and so we chatted for a couple of minutes, and then he left. And that was Crispin Freeman thing. And honestly, I felt a little bad because I didn't share a lot of my sources. In fact, I didn't share any sources in the panel because a lot of them were just interviews I'd read, things I just didn't store that thing. So I felt really bad that I was he wasn't calling me out, but I realized, oh, his standards are so much higher than mine. And I really should do that because he's kind of this is great. Can I, where are your sources? I'd like to dig into this more. And I was I can't tell you, and I feel bad about that. So that was an amazing experience. Kind of nuts. And that was definitely a high point. That was one of those things where I was okay, done and dusted. I never need to go to a con again. I never need to do a panel again. That's kind of the high point. I still love doing panels. No, but that was cool. One other story, a highlight in a different sense. There was, I was at Anime USA again. This was when they were in a different hotel, and I was doing a panel called, I think, A Brief History of Anime. And I noticed that the guest of honor was also doing a panel called A Brief History of Anime. We just, we both happened to submit the same panel title. And so I remember emailing them again and saying, just so you know, this is a thing that happened. It's accidental, I'm sure, but just, double checking that when you say I'm going to be in panel room 3 at 9 p.m., that's my panel, not his panel. Yep, totally fine, totally cool. Okay, great. So I went to the con, started doing my panel. 10 minutes into my panel, the door opens and a man walks in who I happen to know is one of the guys running the con. And he comes in and he walks up and he says, "I'm sorry, I have to pause this for a moment. Brent, can I talk to you for a minute?" And I said, "Sure, absolutely." And so he takes me out of the panel room. I'm like, "What have I done?" Right? I'm flashing through my head. I'm like, "Oh, did they find that thing on my computer?" No. But what's happening here, right? Is there some search warrant out for me? What's happening? And so he pulls me out and he says, "I am so sorry, but this is the panel that we scheduled. This is the place we scheduled for the guest of honors panel. We screwed up. We got it wrong. You're actually over here in panel room 4 doing this thing in this other place." Because the other thing is they scheduled them for the same time. So they're in the same time but different panel rooms, which is why I checked up on that. And so I'm sorry you're over there. And I said, no problem, whatever. And so I went and gathered my stuff, and the guest of honor comes in, and it's Toshio Okada. Toshio Okada is one of the co-founders of Gainax, and is one of he calls himself the Ota King. He is like one of the great otaku of all time. And so he comes walking in. And now I have to get to my other panel, right? So I'm gathering up all my stuff, pulling everything together and going, I'm going to walk right past Toshio freaking Okada, the Ota King. If you've seen Otaku no Video, that guy. I gather up all my stuff, and then I turn to him, and he has his translator there, and I look at him, and I stick out my hand, and I say, "It's a pleasure." And he goes, and his translator says something, and he smiles and goes, "Arigato." And it's that smile of, it was understanding the spirit in which that was intended, of, you respect me for who I am, thank you, I get that. And so we shook hands, and I left. And I just love that I was able to get that little moment with him, in a way that got across, I get you, right? I understand what's going on here. So I went and did my panel, and then ran back, and he was gone by then. But that was an amazing little moment. I was like, that happens to me a lot, Ginger, at cons. A lot of cons, I end up finding out at the last moment that, oh yeah, no, you're not there anymore. AUSA's gotten better, I will say, in the last few years, well, except for, COVID. But in general, panels at cons are not really, really well run, which is one of the reasons for this and the way I do things here at OnCon, is because I think things could be a lot better in terms of how panels are handled and run at cons. Gosh, so annoying. But most of my panels are just, people show up, they snooze through half of it, and I do my best and do my kind of dog and pony show, and then they move on from there. So I, most of the time it's just whatever. I've been to ASEN. What is ASEN? Anime Central, right? I may have once. Where is ASEN? I don't think that is Illinois. No, I've not been to ASEN. Unfortunately, I don't really make it much outside of the East Coast of the U.S. Just because it's, travel is hard and no one pays for my travel yet. I'm not big enough yet that folks are like, yeah, come on over and we'll buy you a plane ticket and we'll get you a hotel room. Like, if that happens, I'll go anywhere. But yeah, unfortunately, I can't really. The problem is I can't justify doing the cons I normally do, and also fly out to other panels. Like I'm busy enough with the existing cons just in the area. It just kind of doesn't make as much sense. But I'd love to. Like I would if I could do panels more often in more places, I would happily do it. It's just hard to do that. And I actually talked to the organizer of a local con about that, and he said one of the problems is, like, con budgets are only so big, and so, and they don't necessarily have, 300 free hotel rooms just give out to anybody. So it's really hard to qualify for those things. So maybe someday, but yes, I would love to do, when it's safe again, I would love to do a physical on-con. I actually tried doing that once. I tried organizing a physical anime convention and launched Kickstarter, which failed. It did not get enough interest, which is understandable. We came out of nowhere and tried to put on a convention. We had no idea what the scale of that would be, how many people might show up, and it's really hard to organize a con when you don't have a defined group of people who are showing up. It turns out, by the way, a lot of the reasons cons exist is because they started out as like an anime club at a college somewhere, and then they would rent out like, the local motel for the weekend, and all they would do is like rent out a little room in there, a quarter of like their space, and we're talking the local cheesy place, and that would work because they knew the entire anime club would show up, which would be 15 people, and then that would happen. They get more people than 15 because they tell their friends. And then they kind of grow from that to another hotel, and each time they could say, well, we got 20 people last time, we got 50 people last time, we got 100 people last time. And it's a lot easier to talk to hotels, it's a lot easier to get deals when you're doing that. Since we didn't have that, we couldn't really, hotels would talk to us, but we couldn't really get useful quotes because they were like, it depends so much on how many people are going to show up. A con for 50 people is going to be priced completely differently than a con for 500 people because we need to staff it, we need to have supplies available. There's issues around trash pickup and all sorts of various things that just change as you scale. So that's one of the reasons. Otakon, Anime USA was started by a local anime club. However many years ago, and they just kind of grew. But yeah, maybe someday we will do a physical con. Although I have to question like how useful physical cons are these days. I love physical cons, but I do think physical cons are going to go through a major change in a little bit. I need to take a quick break though. We've been going for about an hour and a half. I will be back in just a few minutes because I need to take a quick break, and I bet a lot of you do too. So I'm going to be back in just a moment, and we will continue this conversation. Please continue asking in the chat, and we will return in just a moment with more great conversation. See you in a moment.
Yep. All right.
Do that. There we go. Hey, there we are. Um, Apologies, everyone. I did not set up everything for this, but I think we're good to go now. Can you all hear me? And can you hear Steve here?
Can you hear me? Hi there.
Because I can hear him and he can hear me, but I don't know if you all can hear us because that's always the question mark. And we'll see how all this goes. It does look like the microphone's going through. Yes, good. Everything works. I knew it would
Good.
work. No question.
Of course not. Of
Perfect.
course it's going to work.
Right.
Perfect.
It's
Yeah.
on con. Everything works great in on con. Um, McMuffin says, first manga was Crying Freeman. Holy smokes!
Wow.
Yeah, that is a manga for adults.
That's your introduction to manga. Wow. Wow.
So, everyone, so this is Steve. You all know him from the Weekly Dig, also from the Unagi Observer on YouTube and many other things. He's helping me out with OnCon this weekend. I wanted to get you involved in the conversation as well.
Sure.
Yeah. So Shinra Executive talks about, and don't trust Shinra. Um, why don't they just bother to put color on these comics? Like, what's with all of this black and white? Like, why are they cheaping out on all these comics and making them black and white? I had the exact same reaction when I first got into manga. It's so strange that they don't, they're giving us the black and white versions. So strange.
It's a little bit, maybe something to do with money. I don't
Money,
know.
maybe,
Maybe money,
perhaps.
perhaps.
Maybe,
Nah.
maybe.
Budgetary reasons. Nah.
Nah.
Nah. Four color comics never cost anything. Yeah.
Exactly.
But for those of you, I used to, one of my first jobs was actually working in a print shop.
Oh wow.
So, when you make things, you have to do four color things, and multicolored. Like if you're doing just stationery, even just stationery, what that means is that it has to go through the press however many times that you have different colors.
Okay. Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. So it's kind of an expensive process, and also the ink itself is kind of expensive. And then
Okay. Okay.
and why do that when you can go to Manga Fox or something like that.
Exactly. Uh huh.
Infect your computer and cell phone and whatnot.
Yeah. So, what was your first manga, or what were your first manga that you remember? What
Oh
were your early
gosh.
ones?
So this is going way back. I don't even think I told you about this one. So it wasn't Japanese manga.
Okay.
It was Korean, South Korean.
Oh, okay. Yeah, manhwa.
Yeah, and that was because where I lived in Montgomery County, Maryland, south of here. I had Korean neighbors, a guy who was he was working for a business, a large Korean business, and he was going to be in the country for a few years, and he had three daughters. And one day, the neighbors, we just meet up and talk and whatever, and he invited us over to dinner and to meet his family, and it was very strange because the house itself, when you look at it from the outside, is a very American white picket fence. How horses were once raised on it, so it just looks very almost like like some man, not a mansion, but just regular American home, large home. And then you go inside, and everything is totally different. It's Korea,
Wow. Cool.
right? So you walk in, and everything, from the furniture to everything is just completely different. So we're trying to communicate with the daughters. Actually, it's two daughters, one son, and the youngest daughter and I were the same age, and she was like, "Okay, and let me show you. These are because I said something about comics. I think I was like fourth grade, fifth grade,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah." And said something, I like comics or whatever. She goes, "Oh, let me show you my comics." And so she brought out these big omnibuses things that they're like this thick, and like the paper is like onion skin, right?
Mm.
And she goes, "Here you go." So I'm looking at it, and I'm looking at this thing that I've never, this is, keep in mind, she's in fourth or fifth grade, the same as I am. And I'm looking at this Korean manga, and first she has to explain to me, flips it over and says, "No, this is how you look at it.
Yeah.
The correct way to look at it." So I'm looking at it, and it's all in Korean, so I have no idea, got nothing,
Sure.
no, nothing at all. And I'm reading through it, and I was like, okay, I don't really understand. So she's kind of filling in, and it was the most graphically violent thing I had seen at that point in my life. The maiden who's in trouble, the damsel in distress who's being rescued by the young, character, chibi character, she's having her tongue pulled out by what appears to be an oni with a hook in it, and this is for that age group. That was the comic. I'm used to reading,
Wow.
Superman or watching Underdog. The old
Yeah.
Underdog kind of says, "Here I come to save the day." Nobody's getting their tongue pulled out. So that was kind of, I guess, the
Wow.
first thing I got, first thing that I had experienced. I had experienced anime before I experienced manga,
Okay.
and it was at an Otakon where I really started. This was probably 2004 when I really started looking at manga and starting enjoying it. And I don't remember exactly what my first Japanese manga was. I tell you, the first one the two that I truly enjoyed was Ranma One Half and Maison and Koku. I love Maison and Koku. And then, just went on from that. And for a while there, I was just really about the manga.
Okay.
Anime kind of went to the side a little bit, and I was really about the manga. And then I found this one, and it's still, I would have to say, it's probably still one of my favorites. Is even though I don't think it's being made anymore, is Kurosagi Corpse Service.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Which is one of my favorites right now.
I can totally understand that.
Yeah. But I am reading Drops of God, which is actually really pretty darn good. All about wine.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, my first manga. Okay. All right. I don't remember. I honestly don't remember my first manga is because a lot of them were. Actually, I remember two of them because manga wasn't really, like you said, it wasn't really available in America a lot. You could find it here and there, but it wasn't like as broad. So I remember going into the Barnes and Noble in Tyson's Corner, back when that existed, and they had a pretty large selection, if you will, of manga. It was, I think, 2 shelves. So
it was a treasure trove.
It was
back then. That was a treasure trove.
Yeah. So I read an issue of El Hazard, which I then later discovered was a mangaization of the anime. It wasn't what it was based on. So I was like, okay, it's fine. I came across this thing called Bokurano, which those familiar know it is about preteen children. I know it wasn't preteen. It wasn't Bokurano. It was the thing he made before Bokurano. Narutaru Silver Stories or something. Basically, preteen children befriend alien creatures, kind of ET-esque, and then you discover that these alien creatures flit away from the kids occasionally and take down fighter jets, and then flip back. Yeah, it's like, oh, and then the other thing I picked up was this sci-fi manga called Gray Digital Target. Yeah.
Best ending ever.
Best ending ever. And that was because they had all of it. It was only, I think, 2 volumes or something.
No, there was couldn't have been that much.
So, yeah, exactly. So I read it. Worst ending ever. The anime has a different worst ending ever. Where they both have the worst ending ever.
Oh,
and I'll be glad to talk about that if anyone's curious about Gray Digital Target. And that was my exposure. So I was like, nope. Manga is not for me. Clearly.
I can see why you would sour on that.
you had Gray, and then you had the Narutaru, which was I have a thing for kids in danger. And that was just not my. I was like,
Yeah.
So yeah, but yeah, then got in. And actually, let me pull up my recently recently read list because I always forget the names of things because, of course, manga stories now I'll have to have ridiculously long titles. Um, I've been reading Campfire Cooking in Another World with My Absurd Skill, where
Wow.
a salaryman is summoned to a fantasy world. And I actually really appreciate this opening. So he and two, Japanese teenagers are summoned to this fantasy world, whereupon the king says, "We are at war with the demons, the demon realm to the north, and we need heroes who will rise and do all that." And the salaryman, who's like 29, he's looking around and he's going, "Giant throne room. Everyone looks bored. King and queen are have lots of money and lots of jewels and so forth. This is so sketch. We're going to be sent to the front lines to expand the kingdom. They don't care about the demons. This is all a land grab. I know I'm being played." And so he says, "Okay, you know what? I'm sorry. I'm not interested. Can you just give me a bag of gold and let me go?" And the next panel is literally he's standing like on the entrance to the castle as the doors are shutting behind him, and he's like holding his bag of gold. And so he's like, "Nope, just not interested." But he does have two abilities. Like every isekai hero who's summoned into another world, he has the appraise skill. So he can appraise what things are worth.
Right.
And so he's like, "Okay, I can be a merchant." And he discovers the other weird power he has. And again, the manga is like, because of course every isekai hero has some weird power that they have. It is a direct connection to Amazon.com. So he can pull up the menu and just go to the URL and go to Amazon and
But
just
of
order
course.
whatever he wants, and poof, they appear in front of him. And then the thing is, he likes to cook. And so he ends up moving into kind of, he wants to kind of set up sort of a merchant business, but he's like, "I need to get the F out of here because I don't want to be in a kingdom that's about to go to war." And so he's basically traveling from place to place trying to find a safe spot. And the thing is, Amazon accepts money in the equivalent of modern currency for modern prices. So he can buy a pound of salt for a
Oh
copper.
my god.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
It's called Campfire Cooking in Another World with My Absurd Skill. And I just really enjoy the fact that it's originally a light novel, now a manga. I'm reading the manga, and it maintains kind of that lighthearted nature. He stumbles across a dire wolf, who comes into his camp and goes, "That smells good. Feed me it." Okay. Yes, sir.
Yes. Yes. Just don't eat me. Here you go.
And then that becomes kind of a storyline. So it's a really fun one. Again, very lighthearted. I hope it becomes an anime because I think it would be a really, easy to make a fun anime out of it. So yeah, enjoying that right now. I'm actually really enjoying all the manga that's available now. I feel like we have such a wide variety that if you want something goofy, you can do goofy. You want something serious, you can do serious.
Yeah.
One of these days, people are saying, I want to get into Monster. Like, I really want to read Monster one of these days. Everyone recommends it, and I love Urasawa, his stuff. It's amazing. Yeah, Charmy, it's basically me. I'll be honest. The main character of that manga is basically me. But sadly, I cannot make like chicken meat stir fry the way that he can. Oh. Yeah. Can I show? I think I can. Just so you all know, get a sense of this. Can you see it? You can just kind of see
yeah.
it. That's 20th Century Boys up there. So one of these days, I will get to it.
Wait a minute, you haven't read 20th Century Boys yet?
I have not. No, well, I read like the first 6, 7 volumes, something like that.
Oh,
and it was
wow.
like, oh my gosh, I am blown away.
It's a trip.
And I'm like, and then I was like, okay, I need to collect it. Like I was at that point where I was like, I refuse to move forward on this and then have to stop halfway through. I'm going to collect the entire thing so I can, consume in mass quantities. And then once I got it, other things came in. As I'll get back to it one of these days.
Oh man, get back to it because it is a treat. And once you read them, watch the live action movies.
Yeah, I've seen clips of that. I'm like, ooh.
Yeah. Actually, that's for me. That's an Otakon memory. That's actually.
Oh, nice.
I think that's one of the movies that made me portion my time at Otakon to go to watch the live action movies, and that's how I started watching. I've always watched foreign films and things like that, but I've never watched kind of like fandom live action kind of movies, Sword and that kind of stuff. I was always the Wong Kar-wai art house and Akira Kurosawa and all that stuff, and then you go in and you're just like, then you discover the Beat Takeshi movies, and you're just like, I love it.
Exactly. And yet, Captain Laser, as I'm with you, Pluto is my favorite Urasawa manga. Partly because the Astro Boy elements. Also because, so if anyone's curious, I just got to point this out. So I'll show you two things about Pluto. So Pluto is an adaptation of an Astro Boy story. And folks are like, I know what Astro Boy is, not interested. This is Naoki Urasawa's Astro Boy. And whenever he shows up, and I'll see if I can show him in here. Yeah, that's the... This means nothing, so I can show it to you, but this is what he looks like. Yeah. He just looks like a boy. And that's a thing. The other thing I love about this manga is that Dr. Tenma, Astro Boy's very complicated creator-father figure, looks like this.
Oh.
Remind you of anyone?
Just a little bit. Yeah. Good Lord.
And that is very intentional. Like it is just Gendo Ikari inserted into Astro Boy because that's basically what his character is. And so it's really interesting because it very much plays off that, what's brilliant is, again, you've got an Astro Boy story, and so for the Japanese audience, they're like, we know who this character is. You add that extra layer, and folks are like, okay, yeah, that's something else. For folks who aren't into Astro Boy, you add that, and the folks are like, oh, okay, I get this. I know who this person is and what their relationship is. It's an easy into the story. But yeah, brilliant. So I want to talk to you, Steve, a little bit about the history of anime.
Sure.
And how anime evolved a little bit. Partly because we're both more familiar with, especially like anime fandom and anime as it grew in like the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s. And again, we're going to talk about what it was like being an otaku in those periods tomorrow.
Right.
But like the evolution of the medium, I think, is just so interesting because like you go back to things like Dirty Pair.
Right.
Back to those things which are just very much a product of their time. How do you see anime kind of evolving, like pre-2000, say? Like what are the big trends that you saw in anime over those decades that make that period different from like anime of today? What was the appeal?
Oh, okay. So, well, when you first started watching anime, like for me, and this is bad telling of my age. So there was Kimba the White Lion, Speed Racer, Star Blazers, which is Yamato, and I swear to God, I am going to get that 20-foot model and hang it up in my bedroom here. But when as a kid, you're the first thing that you watch is when you're watching anime is it's the big eyes, and how fast everything moves, and that the animation is completely different than what you're watching from everything else, and the animation seems more fun, kind of thing. But the stories are
Yeah.
pretty simple. Except I really didn't realize that for Killer the White Lion that was his father's pelt that he was sleeping with this entire time. And when I learned that years later, decades later, I was like so creeped out because I was like, as a kid, I'm
Sure.
watching that. I'm sure my mom, who was like, sat me in front of the television, she was like, breakfast, probably going, "Oh, what? Yeah, why is my son watching this? I don't understand." Anyway, so but as as the fandom grows, part of it is that reach of like being able to get out to everybody, and we can talk specifics, particularly with Robotech about being the big one,
Yeah.
and but there are like little other jump points, like in the 70s, it's Spaceship Yamato, it's Speed Racer, honestly. And you talk about Channel 20 earlier, things like that overtake Hanna-Barbera. But then there was the Transformers, and at the same time Voltron, because that's the first. Voltron is the first anime that I attributed to being an anime.
Yep.
Yeah, that I identified as anime. And then I learned that these other things I liked, I enjoyed them as well. But it's just this is all ongoing process of like people discovering as the audience is aging, they're writing the stories for that audience as it keeps going, more and more through time. So that by the time we hit the 90s, you and I are watching. You're watching Lane, I'm watching, Dominion Tank, Police Akira, all that stuff, and it's just
that we got. Sorry.
Yeah. And it's just a Go-Go 13, things like that.
Yeah.
And then being able to not find it, and that was the biggest problem in the 80s. Was in the late 80s, you're like going, okay, anime, this is my thing. This is my gig, and I want more of it. So let's go down to the video store and find all 5 copies of. What is this? Aqua Boy? Don't know what the hell this is.
So I remember in my local Sam Goody, they had a couple tapes of Dragon Ball Z, a couple tapes of I think Sailor Moon, maybe not, because Sailor Moon actually took a little while to tape. I think there was some Ranma, Akira, because Akira that they threw that on tape as quick as they could.
Boy, did they!
And I think that was it.
Yeah,
that was your selection of anime. That
was it.
Yeah.
So you would go into these stores, and this is the time of VHS tapes. So of course, each tape's like freaking $42. So and then if you go to like Errol's, or who remembers Errol's? Errol's was the predecessor to Blockbuster. How many of you remember Blockbuster? Anyway, so you would go to these places, and literally the selection is exactly as Brent described it. It's literally like one shelf, and that was pretty much it. And you could tell that there was someone just said, the cover of that looks kind of weird and fun, and maybe some kid might like that. Go 13, yeah, I'm sure an 8-year-old would appreciate that one.
Big eyes.
Yeah, it's big eyes. Yeah, it's cute looking. We'll throw it out there, see what happens. And so, and I worked in this one very local. It was only one store. It was called VCR, charmingly called Video Cassette Rentals, VCR.
Okay.
And so they didn't really. Again, they had the one shelf, but there was one guy who was working there, and of course, there's the adult section in the back, right? And so one day I'm old enough, and I'm given stuff to put back on the shelves, so I go back there, and then I see all of this hentai there, and I'm like, and it's like more there than there is regular anime on the shelf, and I'm like thoroughly confused at this. I'm like going, because remember, folks, back in my time, IRC was the best thing I could do for communication. We didn't have, there was no video downloads. But it was just really so hard to find and to get. And as you were saying earlier, there were clubs you had to join. There were things that you had to sign up for, and there were things that you had to buy. in order to get it. But once the fandom hit, and that's when we talk about Voltron, that's when we talk about Robotech and things like that. Once that hit the United States, and people in the United States, suddenly there's this huge desire for this.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So reversing a little bit, we have Astro Boy and Gigantor and like the '60s stuff, which, from what I understand, from what I've seen, came over pretty quick. Like we got them within a year or two of their Japanese broadcast. They were definitely revisioned.
Yes.
And again, because American television standards are different. And I always got the feeling that those were popular. Those got a viewership, but not so much like a fan base, right? Like people weren't all saying, "I watch Astro Boy Gigantor," Speed Racer. The Speed Racer came later. It was more, "Oh, I watched that, I like it. Oh, I watched that, I like it. I watched that, I like it." And it seems to me like, because Speed Racer was late 60s, was it?
Speed Racer was 67, 68.
Okay.
It came over to the United States 69, 70.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
Yeah. Something like that.
And it feels like Speed Racer was almost like the last of that set, where like my older sister loved Speed Racer. Only cartoon I think she ever enjoyed. But that was just her. She really enjoyed that, and so. But again, it feels like it was one of those things that became that, and to me it feels like Star Blazers first was the first one that started being people identified. I like Star Blazers. Oh, and this is like
right
those other things.
Mm-hmm.
But then Robotech. Right.
Yeah. So one of the things that out there in Chatland, when we're talking about the 60s and 70s, and we're talking about anime coming over and being a broadcast, one of the things about broadcast television at the time is that it was very localized. So, when you did see Gigantor, when you did see Astro Boy, it was not on NBC, CBS, or any of the ABC. It was not on any of the major networks. It was on the second dial with all with the 45, channel 20, 45, 32, and all that. And they only would get what their budget would fit in there, what they thought a kid might like. It's Gigantor. It's a giant robot. Everyone, what little boy doesn't like this? Bring it in. We'll pay for the ADC script. Do it. Have our voice actors come in and just do it, and then we'll just throw it on. And so that was pretty much how the anime got to it. But even with Robotech, it got to a point where if you lived in Washington, D.C., you got a portion of it, but you didn't get the whole thing. If you lived in California, you probably got more of the series than you did out there. And it was just all about advertising and interest in that. Could local toy stores, would they buy the ad space for that show? That's what would happen. But when after Robotech started exploding, and then Voltron came onto the scene, when you hit 1990, there was a nostalgia, very brief for about a year. There was a nostalgia thing going on that MTV did, and they brought Speed Racer back, and they put Speed Racer on. This was about 1989, 1990.
Okay.
And the only reason why they did that was because there was a club song where they sampled the theme song.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right? And then they made it dirty because it's a club song. And so they made Trixie more than Trixie. And so it got a kind of a little bit of popularity. So MTV said, oh, everyone really likes this video, so we're going to bring in the Speed Racer. And people actually watched it.
Yeah. Wow. That's interesting. I had a question, and now I don't. Now there's something around like Speed Racer, I think, is one of those fascinating shows where, kind of like we were talking about with Titanic, like no one can look at Speed Racer and say this is going to be a hit,
Right.
but it absolutely was. And then Star Blazers came in, and of course Star Blazers. Oh, that was the thing I want to talk about. When you, so for folks watching, when you go to your terrestrial TV box and switch it to your local NBC station, understand that is a local company, that is a local broadcaster, that is a local broadcaster. They have a broadcast tower, and they have signed up with NBC to broadcast their stuff. If we rewind time back 50 years when that was just being set up, all of these local broadcasters, they just had the ability to broadcast, and they needed content.
Anything.
And
Literally.
so NBC, ABC, and CBS were convenient ways of getting a lot of content, because you'd say, instead of every single broadcast tower basically having to get its own 24 hours of content, I'll sign on with CBS and they will give me a certain amount of content for every day. But early on, when you do CBS, thank you, Colin, appreciate that very much. Early on the day, CBS would give you 8 hours of content in a day. We're talking like 60s, 70s, etc. And so you had vast amounts of time during the rest of the day when you could show whatever you wanted to, and you needed to fill that time. So you would license, some random anime and bring it on because it was cheap. You could just throw it on, kids would watch it, whatever. And so the problem is that, the Indianapolis NBC affiliate might have licensed that, but the Chicago one might not have. And it was all spread out all over the place. So like WDCA TV showed a bunch of stuff. The local NBC, like I think, I know there were, maybe even Sailor Moon that like aired on our NBC affiliate in like the 90s, but wasn't an NBC show. Just that channel had licensed that show to show at 8:30 a.m. So it was just such a broad range of availability. It wasn't like, Kimba comes out. Well, Kimba's a different
Right.
movie. But this show comes out so everyone sees it. No. If you happen to be in a region where somebody had
Yeah.
licensed that and it was available, then you could see it. So it's a very different experience. Very weird.
Yeah, so for example, there was no Crunchyroll, so there was no way for everyone to go, hey, the new stuff is coming out. Let's all have a watch party, and 20 of us can get together and watch the same thing, and be all across the nation and do it. You would actually have to invite your friends over, make some popcorn and stuff,
Yeah.
and sit everyone down, and you crowd around a TV that was probably about this big, and it was probably black and white.
Yeah.
And you wished for color. You wished for your neighbor's television.
And remember, there's no home video recording yet.
Yep. No
So-
VCRs.
Yep.
Or there were VCRs, but they cost about $5,000, and they were the size of a room, and
I did some research on this because I remember I was going to do a panel on early American anime fandom, and looked up the prices of
Yeah.
VHS versus Betamax,
yeah.
and it was like, oh, this is why.
Right.
The VCR was like half the price of Betamax, and then quickly like a third the price of Betamax. It's like,
Right.
oh, but they were both. I think it was like 5,000 for the first Betamax, and I think 3,500 for the first VCR.
Yeah.
Or the first VHS machine. So it's like you buy a car, or you can record videos.
Right. It was not cheap.
No.
It was not cheap at all.
And so again, that makes fandom very different, because it is very much about what you manage to catch, what you're able to see, and it makes cons much more important,
Yes.
because then you go to Illinois or whatever, or you go to San Francisco for your convention, and you meet people who who literally have access to different anime than you do.
Mm-hmm. And I would argue that would almost make like the cons back then kind of more interesting a little bit, because then you would have a whole set of people who would just be like, "Hey, have you seen this? No, what is that? Tell me about it." And then and who knows? That's probably actually what happened. That's probably how things got spread around, and probably hopefully that's how the fan base grew.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's so the broadcasting in the 60s and the 70s were patchwork at best, and they you had to, I would say you would have to have lived in a major metropolitan area like Brett and I did, which was Washington D.C. with a large broadcasting. Channel 20 had a very powerful broadcasting area net, and so we were able to get those things. But if you were like living out in Iowa, Des Moines or something, probably not so much.
Yeah. And again, it's one of the reasons why you see this fascinating spread of anime conventions, because they first started in the major metropolitan areas, but then they very quickly sprouted in the non-major metropolitan areas, because it was all the folks who were like, "Oh my gosh, there are other people interested in this," and they got together so they could actually share information. So I think when we're charting 60s, 70s, 80s, obviously in the 60s it's really more just what do they have. And then the 70s, you get, spoiler alert, Star Blazers came over here because of a particularly popular movie in 1977.
Just a little thing. You might have heard of it.
Yeah. And again, that's really what you see, I think, in the 70s and 80s. Yeah, science fiction really was the big driver for that.
Yeah.
And then that's a really good question, Lord Admiral. When did the syndicated cartoon block become a thing? So first off, the question is cartoon, not anime, and then anime. The syndicated cartoon block, that was definitely 80s.
Mm-hmm. The syndicated ones were definitely 80s. There were cartoon blocks in the 70s, and that was your Saturday morning cartoons were your money makers. And then on Sunday you had the retro ones, which was the Hanna-Barbera, Johnny Quest and Thundarr the Barbarian, which I would say are much superior to the Adventures of Snagglepuss on Hanna-Barbera. That's just me.
You dare put down Huckleberry Hound like that?
Sir, I will meet you on the field at dawn. But yeah, it's so it did exist in that form, but in terms of the actual blocks, you don't really see those. Again, you have to see those on the non really the channels that are not the big broadcasting channels. Those are the ones like Channel 45, where a program director actually just put them together, and then discovered that they could make a show out of it.
Because I think you certainly had syndicated cartoons weekday afternoons, but it wasn't a block. It was just Inspector Gadget, G.I. Joe, whatever, and they would just show. But then you started seeing definitely Saturday morning blocks, but like you say, they weren't syndicated. The first one I can think of was the Disney Afternoon, actually, as an advertised block. This was a named block of things. You got the same consistent thing all the way through. But again, I think it was the culmination of a history of those things kind of evolving into that form. I'm sure it wasn't the first to do that.
It just, if we're talking about what we know as a cartoon block as today, it's the evolution comes from that. It just morphed into where they discovered that. I think what it was just that it was, okay, here are the kids. It's a convenient time to throw it at the kids so that they can see the toy and go to mommy and go, I want the toy. And then it evolved into more along the lines of, well, we have this content. This is where we're going to put it because mom and dad are not going to be up at 8:30 in the morning. They're just barely getting their coffee, just being aware of the world.
Yeah.
So, we'll just throw that stuff that time and get the kids interested. But then once the cartoons stop being cartoons, then they start getting more sophisticated.
Toy
and
ads.
That's where and that's when anime started coming in and started being more sophisticated. Voltron, for what it was was far more sophisticated than a lot of the other stuff that was out there. American,
Understand. Voltron was competing with He-Man.
right?
Yeah, He-Man is not a sophisticated cartoon.
No, no. That's why I say, yeah, definitely for what it was far more sophisticated than He-Man. All those, I love Skeletor. Skeletor.
Oh yeah. I will take a quick tangent. I remember watching the He-Man remake from like 10 years ago or so.
Oh yeah.
And it was fine. Like they knew what they were doing. It was fine. I think it was Korean animated. And they did a good job. I remember there was one moment where what's the little wizard guy who's like
Orko.
Orko. Skeletor is coming after He-Man, and Orko lures him into a cave, and then like douses the lights, and then and the lights go off, and you see Skeletor's eyes go bright, and he goes, "Ooh, the dark. I'm so scared." Like, that's that character. Thank you. That's exactly the tone that show had.
Yeah, and then they turned into actual companies. That's when things got to where they are today. What they look like today is when they actually turned into companies like Adult Swim and the precursor of Adult Swim.
And the thing is to understand, and by the way, if you all are curious about this, Toy Galaxy YouTube channel, they have tons of videos about all this and the whole history of all this.
Watch it. Yeah,
fantastic. But just the extremely high level, understand that Kenner went from like I'm going to make numbers up, but broadly speaking, like a $2 million company to like a $250 million company in like 5 years with a Star Wars license. Hasbro did like a similar thing in the early 80s, just off of like He-Man and these sorts of properties. And so these cartoons suddenly became massive business, which very much changed the nature of what these cartoons were. He-Man was toys first. They designed the toys and then did the cartoon. One of the reasons Robotech was a thing was because there were all of these toys already in existence for Macross and Southern Cross and Mospeada, so it was easier to make toys off of them. The channel is Toy Galaxy, Lord Admiral. And so similarly, now the floodgates were open, and Voltron was important because that showed that you could license an anime series, even just one or two, and still reap all the same sorts of profits that you would from a He-Man type of arrangement. And so that opened the thing of folks saying, okay, what anime exists? Bring it in. License it.
Right,
it.
yep.
Yeah. But like you say, absolutely, what I find is so fascinating is that then Robotech comes in, and now you get a fandom that is actually aware of what they're watching as an art form, where they're not watching it just for the pure, action, adventure, entertainment aspect. They're watching it because they like the kind of story it's telling and its unique approach to things. And so folks want that. And so now you have a growing industry around that particular kind of show.
And keep in mind that this is Robotech is the anime that Americans aged into anime. And this is Robotech. Like Voltron gave you an idea. Okay, this is what anime is. Beforehand, you were just like Big Eyes. Okay, and then you would watch. You would watch Star Blazers, and you wouldn't really get the concept of Star Blazers because you're only like 7, 8 years old. But the ship is awesome, right? When you're 7 or 8 and you're watching this, and you're just like, I want that ship. I want to fire the big gun. That's really what it is. You want to fire the big gun. And then it's Robotech is where you actually get, where people age into the animation and they discover something about anime that they're not getting necessarily all that frequently in like the Hanna-Barbera cartoons and stuff like that. And that is that I like that character. He's fun. He's great. Oh my God, he died.
Yeah.
And not in a pleasant way.
No.
Oh dear. Oh dear.
I mean, it's actually funny going back and watching Macross and realizing how bloodily they would dispatch some of those characters.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think, you also got to remember that the '80s is a time of the post-apocalyptic craze, right?
Yep.
Of sci-fi reaching a level of relative pop culture maturity, where people like respected Star Trek for being a brainy franchise. People were looking for things that were, we talked about Damnation Alley, looking for things that weren't as kind of cliche. And BattleTech, right?
Yeah.
Is a thing now. Tabletop miniature wargaming is a thing now. Dungeons and Dragons. And so you have all these forces now making people hungry for that kind of stuff, where now you can tell serious sci-fi war stories. And there's a clear market for that kind of stuff. Robot Jocks, all that kind of stuff.
Oh God, Robot Jocks! I forgot about that one. God. All right, folks, it's a cheesy thing, and you're gonna look at it and you're going, "Why did you tell me to watch this? Just watch it. Just watch it and enjoy it. Ride the ride. It is Robot Jocks is it's something.
Robot Jocks is one of 2 or 3, literally Hollywood, Western-made live-action mecha movies from the '80s.
Yep.
There are literally piloted giant robots in these movies as main features. Just be aware of that.
And they make such poor Gundams, it's not even funny.
Yeah.
A Pat Labor could take them down.
Yeah. Well, and then we waited a little while longer for what was the live-action Gundam movie made in Canada in like 2001, whatever it was.
I think that I drank that one out of my memory.
Oh, I have so many thoughts about that. Captain Laser Eyes asks, why is a lot of the good older stuff mostly science fiction? And I think it's kind of what we're talking about here, is that science fiction was the thing. Star Wars. It was a combination of science fiction allows you to tell more serious stories. You have all the history of Heinlein and all these authors doing serious stories in there. But G. Savior, thank you. G. Savior. Anyway. And because sci-fi was hot, all the stories were sci-fi, right? Just like right now, all these guys' stories are isekai because this guy's hot, not because that's the only idea anyone ever has.
Right. Yeah. I think the other part of it is that science fiction is and comic books are understood fandoms.
True. Yeah.
And so when you make an anime that is based on sci-fi, it's more readily available and acceptable to a lot of people. Like, whereas, I really don't think that they're going to, back in the 70s and 80s, I really don't think that anime that type of anime, like, honestly, Death Note, I don't think would have done very well at all.
Yeah.
And, things like that, or moes, or a certain moe would have done. And I'm sure that would have angered your previous guest had he been alive at that time.
And Sanpu, you're absolutely right. Mecha are easy to make toys out of.
That's right. Yep. And it's,
and science fiction as well. I mean, lest we forget, G.I. Joe was a realistic military, doll figurine line until they realized there's only so much we can do with that. But if we make up, laser guns and tanks and stuff, we can do whatever we want.
I love how G.I. Joe went from Kung Fu Action Grip, and that was the best technology in toy making, to the actual stuff that you got in the 80s, all the like the big Cobra base and all that stuff. But but again, but to that point, that's why it's merchandisable, it's recognizable, it's something that the older anime can seize on.
Yep.
And then as we're talking about Robotech and Macross and just kind of expanding it, the biggest game changer I think for anime at that point in the 90s was cable.
Interesting.
And cable television pretty much destroyed network, the way that network works. And it created a more, not level playing field, but a playing field where you could go from a channel where they go, we have so many things that we have to worry about our children watching, and we're so concerned about these things, and we don't want our kids to see this, blah, 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 blah. And then you have a cable channel that you have to pay for that is outside of all that, and you have to have a hookup for the most part. And so, if you're willing to pay for all that, then suddenly you
And
get
that's
the
showing
shows
all the stuff that we don't want
that's
to
showing
show.
all the stuff that the network doesn't want to show. Then
Mhm.
that's what you're getting. And but cable was, but that's the other thing, is that the cable companies at the time were not making their own stuff. They were licensing, 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 licensing. So they went out there. So if they decided they were going to show Robotech Lacrosse, they're going to buy the whole thing and show you the whole thing. They might only show it to you once,
Mm-hmm.
or may only license it for to show it to you once, but they can do that. And then you have a better availability. And then once that happened, and then everyone's just like, going, I've seen Star Blazers 28 times, I've seen Lacrosse 58 times, and I see something. What's this thing called Lane? I'm not sure what is this. So you get more, and that's when the 90s. There's sort of an influx of a little bit of budget, or they just come into anime industry and said whatever, and then all the production studios just went, see what'll stick.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, all the men are dead and all the women are androids. Sure, let's try that one.
All right, so let's see how that goes.
Yeah. Boy. Yeah, it's always fascinating to me. But I actually want to also comment on, you're absolutely right that science fiction boom was also presaged by space exploration. 60s, all that then got people interested in, this. I remember when Ray Bradbury tells a story of when he was first getting into writing science fiction in like the 30s. He would get people who would just look down their nose at what he was doing, and you're sneering, all that kind of stuff. And one day he got a notepad and went around to each person who did that and asked for their name and phone number, and just wrote them down, and said, And 30 years later, on the night of the moon landing, he pulled out his notebook, called each one. Hello, is this John? Yes. You effing idiot. Click. Next page.
Oh my gosh.
And
if I could do that in
know.
today's age, if I could do that, good Lord. So many people.
And that was the thing. And you go back and you look at how suddenly late 60s, early 70s, you're seeing all these science fiction authors doing interviews, people talking about, oh my gosh, these people were actually predicting the future, all of that, that absolutely became legitimized science fiction in this very important way. Which then absolutely made science fiction this thing that, okay, now we can make these stories and that. But yeah, Ray Bradbury was a... Oh, yeah, love that man.
Yeah. I think for me, the anime, I've watched anime for all these years, but I don't think it wasn't until probably the Sci-Fi Channel when they did the cringy little intro.
I'm Apollo Smile.
Yeah. And but that's when I saw, like Dominion Tank Police, Venus Wars, and all that stuff. And of course, back in college, I used to role play the Robotech game.
Oh, nice.
The Robotech RPG game, and those things. And then Akira came out. And speaking of Akira, that was the first movie that I think I really needed to own. And you know what I mean? That was like the first time that I was just like, you know what, I can justify the $42 for this VHS tape, because at that time in 1988, your VCRs were forever.
Yeah, absolutely.
They were forever. They were
Tape
forever.
lasts a really long time. It's a great storage medium. And I'm not even joking there. Like, I remember people making that argument that people have been, the military uses tapes to store data. Like, this is a form. It's not gonna last forever, but it's gonna last.
And then you see the 5-year-old with the magnet with it going, "Hey, look what I'm doing!" No.
Well, and I think it's actually to make that jump. I think Robotech, created that big fandom, but then Akira was the next step, where Akira was close enough to Disney quality animation that you could get folks who, weren't necessarily into the whole anime thing, but were like, oh my gosh, that's gorgeous. I'll sit in for it, and then the, craziness, pulls them in, and they're stuck.
It was that first scene that made you want to buy it, where Tokyo blows up, 1988 Tokyo blows up, and it's that gorgeous, it's gorgeous, but it's horrible.
Yeah.
Scene where the cloud, where it's a dome and it just expands, and you're just like, and at the end of that sequence, you're just like, watch that again.
Yep.
I know it's death and destruction, but let's watch that again.
And remember, that happens. Like the title card that comes up, the date on that is the date of the premiere of Akira in Japan.
Right.
That was very much a statement to the audience at the time.
Could you imagine just seeing that and just being like, okay, the date is
22nd, 23rd.
Oh no.
Love it. Armitage the Third was released in the theaters. That's actually absolutely true. It's amazing, kind of how things were evolving, because you got just a bunch of stuff going on. You've got Akira bringing in that, and also bringing in obviously an older audience. That is not a thing for kids. And like you say, you have a very mature home video market, and so everyone rushes out to buy that tape. And then, 2 years later, Japan's like, money? You have money? Cool, we'd like that money now, please.
Once they realize how much money, oh wow, we've been churning this stuff out for like the past 40 years, and Americans are just like, can we need more, please? Give us more. And just like what you said, they're just like, sure. It's just, it was like, it was like they were crack dealers. They're like, the first one's cheap and it's on me. The second one, you gotta pay, and that's, it's really true, because crack really is cheaper than
Oh, 2 episodes per tape.
That's right. You didn't get 4 with bonus features.
Yep.
On a DVD.
I was always annoyed when they put the trailers on first. Because come on, come on.
Because you couldn't skip over it. You had to fast. What you did is, okay, we skipped over by fast forwarding it. So it went from 5 minutes to 3.5. It was just like high speed, just things going on, and you're just like going.
And then,
there yet?
No, I think that's it. I think we're in the show now. We got to reverse. Yeah.
Well, at least U.S. Manga Corps would put the thing at the front of before they put the thing, so you would know when to stop.
Gosh, I do love the fact that, and I think the staff behind U.S. Manga Corps has said that is our logo. That is our logo sequence for all time.
Yep.
We made that. We financed it. That's it. Like, we see no reason to ever change that. Like, all right, fair enough. And I think it was the 90s, absolutely, when we just got it all. And again, anime did not have a great reputation in America. It had a reputation for being either, hyper-violent tentacle porn, or Speed Racer.
Right.
Maybe both, for all anyone knew. That's all anyone knew that it was. And then the bottom fell out of the market in Japan. They're like, oh, yes, here's more of this thing. Here, please buy our thing.
Please buy our thing. Yeah.
Yes.
I found it very interesting in the late 80s and early 90s as a comic book fan at that time as well. So, that was my fandom, and I collected and, went to conventions and things like that. And, even there, anime was kind of looked down on a little bit. But that's for a long time, that's actually where you had to find anime fans
Mhm.
was Comic Cons,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
to find people like that because there was some tangential relationship there. There was animation,
Yeah.
so it was drawn, but nobody really. You didn't find manga there. You didn't find anything like that. At best, you might see a trailer or two
Mhm.
on some type of whatever movie they were showing at the convention.
Yeah.
But it really was for a while there in the early '90s. Was like, oh, you watch anime? Mm.
Hmm.
Yeah, or like my buddies in college would go, okay, Steve, where are we watching that? Goal 13 was okay. What we got for tonight? And I'm like, I got this at Tower Record rented from Tower Records. It's looks like a fantasy kind of thing, killing monsters. Oh, really? What is it called? Legend of the Overfiend?
Yeah, it should be fun.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
let's put that in.
Sure. Hmm. Overfiend sounds like a great villain, and he is. Um,
Did
yeah.
not did not help. Did not help for the reputation.
Yeah. Um, and again, we'll talk about this tomorrow as well. Is the whole not labeling problem, but the fact that like there was not a lot of attention paid to what you were getting. It was just anime,
Right.
and so if you happened to buy something that was for adult interest in mind, okay, whatever. Why should we care?
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
And not realizing that there were such gems out there like Lupin the Third,
Mhm.
which I love dearly, and then coming across Castle Cagliostro and,
Ah.
things like that.
Well, and you mentioned Comic Cons. The other thing about that is that you didn't have an internet on which to get information.
Right.
So you had to go to things like Comic Cons to find experts who could actually tell you what these things were or where to find them. So, yeah. And good for you, Kevin Laser Eyes, for rewinding all your Blu-rays. Good job. Like, keep on doing that. Absolutely. And yeah, there is an Akira television readaptation in the works, but then there's been a live action Akira adaptation in the works since I think Akira came out. Somebody always wants to make that because they always want to make money off of it, but it's never like really come together. So who knows?
Yeah, just don't let Netflix get a hold of it.
Yeah. The Netflix Bebop thing should be coming fairly soon. Because they
With
made a
bated
lot more money
breath.
on that. Yeah,
With bated
I'm
breath.
curious.
I'm very curious. The
Yeah.
one thing that I'm happy about is that the music is at least it's going to be good.
Mhm.
The rest of it might be crap, but the music will be good.
Yeah, and they said, for what it's worth, for those curious, they did an interview about what is going to be, and like, obvious question is, what are they going to change in the sense of right, like not everything adapts exactly right or exactly the same, and I think the first thing out of their mouth is, I don't think you can do a Cowboy Bebop series without Yoko Kanno's music.
Right.
So like that is just a foundational thing of this. So it's like, okay, good. Like that's a good first step. Like I appreciate that.
Yeah. The Yoko Kanno's bring the band back together. So the seatbelts are going to do she and the seatbelts.
Yeah.
So it's going to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for what it's worth, they basically said that there's going to be less smoking. Like they said they talked to Netflix and said there's a lot of smoking in this. Like what are we gonna do? And they said, you can show smoking, but there's a lot of smoking in Cowboy Bebop.
Right.
So they're like, okay, we don't have to have as many. Like that's not important.
We're not going to trigger you if you just quit smoking.
Exactly. Yeah. And then also, they said Faye's outfits are going to be like she'll still have that outfit, but she's not going to wear it, 24 hours a day like she does in the anime. Partly because that's an anime thing, right? You have the character design of the outfit, and so she can wear more outfits now, more clothing.
And plus the physics of that outfit.
Yeah, exactly. Forrest Ackerman once said they tried to do a Vampirella live action movie and they couldn't.
No, how can you with that?
Yeah, they said literally there was no way to keep the costume on. It's just impossible. Like you literally just like turn and there we go.
Yeah, there we go. Done. We just went from PG-13 to X. Great.
Yeah. But yeah, so that was one of those things where I was like, okay, those all seem like understandable,
Reasonable changes.
And also, by the way, on the smoking thing, just so folks understand, like smoking is so sensitive these days that like that can like change the rating of your show. Is how
Yeah.
much smoking you show. So it's like, okay, they're trying to not make this suddenly get an X rating for some reason because they're showing somebody smoking a cigarette. Yeah, exactly. There's a reason why cosplayers walk like robots all the time.
So true.
Oh gosh, yeah, cosplay is uncomfortable. I believe it's one of Adam Savage's maxims, is that just there is no way to make cosplay that is comfortable for whatever reason. But yeah, I'm just reminded there was just watching footage from a Genshin Impact cosplay event in China.
Oh my gosh.
Oh man, the amount of time and effort people put into those costumes is insane. For a game where like the outfits are very fantastical, right? Like there's a lot of effort to around like hair ornaments and all these various things where there's just lots of detail. It's like, oh gosh.
Having worked in many theaters over the years in opera houses, the costume designers earn their paycheck. They truly do. When you see the costumes, you might not think it's much, but trust me, you should see some of the places that they work. Like the last theater I worked at, CSC, she had an entire part of the basement for her clothes and stuff, and she's like, "Here's my library of costumes," and it's just like, okay, here's room number 1, here's room number 2, room number 3. You have the mannequins, you have the cutouts, she's got all these different magazines, and there's like historical books, so that you can get the
Sure.
the stuff right, especially if you're doing Shakespeare, you gotta get the historical things right. So it's just like, I've always thought that, I've never done cosplay, but I always thought that if I did cosplay, I would be like, you know what, I'm gonna hit up one of my costume designers.
Yeah,
That's what I gotta do. That's what I gotta do.
Well, pulling back to anime, the '90s was where cosplay culture became like integrated into the industry.
Yeah.
Like, I know, and this probably wasn't the first time it happened. I know for Cardcaptor Sakura, the movie, like they designed, there were design decisions made about her outfits in the movie to ensure that they were cosplayable. Where like they were trying to decide things and said, no, let's make sure there's something that folks can actually physically wear, and they don't have like weird concepts and so forth, because that was the thing now. Like fans cared about that enough to where the industry was now paying attention to it in their costume design. And because you'd had situations like, I think we talked about the problem with 14-year-old Lum cosplayers walking down the street in Japan. And how that changed things in Japan a little bit around. Let's maybe not have that.
Yeah. Yeah. Please no.
Yeah, it's great. Like as Ginger in the chat knows, in Japan you basically pay a couple of bucks and go in and you have a basic changing room. And I wish that was a feature in anime conventions.
I know, right? I mean, seriously, it does. U.S. conventions, yeah, because that would make things life so much easier. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into a men's room and I'd see like this cardboard arm sticking over the stall, and I'm just sitting there going, which right, yeah, and just like God, it's too much trouble. It's too much trouble.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've cosplayed. I've had 3 cosplay outfits, all pretty easy, but they're still just a pain. Putting them on, taking them off, going to the bathroom, sitting down often. It's like, this thing is now falling all over the place.
There was at the last Otakon at the BCC here in Baltimore. There was the girl who was the mermaid. And she had the fishtail, but her boyfriend was there, so she would have to get on the ground, get on the floor, squirm into this thing, zip it up, and then just pose. And she would be in that same location for like probably a good 30-40 minutes. Wow. Because just to get all the pictures done and the posing and the whatnot. And then she would have to unzip, and the boyfriend would have to help her out, and all that kind of stuff. And it's just like going. That's when you just kind of look at some of the cosplay and you just go, "Wow."
Well, much less.
You're dedicated.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a dedication to this.
Absolutely. Remember all the Nicholas D. Wolfwoods?
Yes.
Yeah. Where people would have these 10-foot crosses that they'd walk around with?
My favorite, again, an Otagon memory, my favorite was the guy who made his out of Legos.
Dang, man. Yeah. The weight of that?
He slung that thing around like it was nothing. He was probably used to it because I'd seen him come to 3 Otacons like that. So like his right arm is probably just like all maxed out, bulged, just like.
Cannot imagine. That's nuts. Much less than the Cloud Strifes with the giant, the Buster Sword and all that kind of stuff. And I think actually, those are sometimes harder because it's sticking out.
Yeah.
And you're often just kind of not quite aware of where it is.
Oh, my face has felt the swords.
Right.
Walking out of the video room, kind of adjusting to like flap. You're just like, oh, okay, yeah, thanks.
Mm-hmm. I think we've all lost an eye nearly once or twice at a con because somebody's came in. Cool. Well, everyone, this has been great, but we have a whole nother day planned for tomorrow. We have a bunch of panels coming up tomorrow, including some by both of us, actually, in separate things. We're going to be talking about history of anime, how anime is actually made. So I'll have some anime cells to show you, and some actual anime production stuff. I believe, I know, that Steve will be doing a thing on Cowboy Bebop and Yoko Kanno. That's going to be great.
The music of Cowboy Bebop.
Cowboy Bebop, absolutely. Got a panel about Type Moons, if you're curious about that Saber girl, that Rin girl. You find out where that came from. That's a really interesting history. I was not aware of all of the backstory of all that, and that's kind of fun, seeing how that evolved. And then our very own Ginger Gaten in the chat is going to be showing us Akihabara for an hour, which is going to be a lot of fun, and it's going to be really, really cool. So we'll be starting that at 9 a.m. Eastern tomorrow, not p.m. a.m. 9 a.m. Eastern tomorrow will be the first panel, right here on YouTube. Also, I wanted to point out, there'll be a Twitch stream running as well with a whole bunch of Nozomi Entertainment anime from the 90s and like early 2000s. So we'll be showing Revolutionary Girl Utena, Boogie Pop Phantom, Aria the Animation, Gasoraki, which is kind of an obscure but very interesting mecha series from the time. Just a whole bunch of stuff. So go ahead and check out OnCon on geekarchaeology.com. If you're interested in any of that stuff, that will be streaming legally. It's all like, this is when I say it's
all legal.
Entertaining, we got the sign off from Nozomi, so it's cool. So head over to twitch.tv/geekarchaeology. I'll have those links up, and you get a chance to see some really cool anime. So that is the plan. We also got a side tube running with some a bunch of stuff, and we will have a whole bunch more on tomorrow. That is the plan.
Indeed.
So thank you all so much. We're going to have the stream go dark for now, let everyone get some rest, prepare for tomorrow, have a whole day of anime stuff. Looking forward to it. So thank you all so much, and we will see you on the flip side, 9 a.m. sharp tomorrow.
9 a.m.
See ya.
See ya.